Somewhere between forgotten jungles and silent tombs, beneath ancient oceans and buried in time, are things we were never supposed to find. Objects carved by unknown hands, machines made before machines were even imagined, and whispers from civilizations we barely remember. Tonight we're not just telling stories, we're following traces through gold dust, spinning stones and mirrors that don't reflect. This is a slow descent into mystery, one artifact at a time. Get comfortable, let your mind wander, because what you're about to hear might not let you see the world the same way again. The skull that doesn't match. It was supposed to be just another strange relic found in the quiet desert outside Chihuahua, Mexico. Two skulls, unearthed from a shallow cave by a teenage girl, were resting beneath layers of centuries-old dust. One belonged to a normal adult woman, the other didn't. And that second skull would go on to spark some of the most heated debates in fringe archaeology and mainstream science alike. They called it the Starchild skull, but it wasn't a child. And calling it a star, anything made some researchers uneasy. Not because they didn't believe the skull was strange, it definitely was, but because the questions it raised were the kind that didn't have simple answers. And for those seeking a peaceful sleep tonight, let this be your quiet descent into something both calming and bewildering. Let's start at the beginning. The year was the 1930s. Rural Mexico. A teenage girl wandered into a small tunnel, rumored to have once been used by indigenous groups for burials. What she found there were two complete skeletons. One normal, one entirely abnormal. She buried them again, too frightened to carry them away. It would take decades before the bones would finally make it into the hands of someone who would pay attention. That person was Lloyd Pye, an author and researcher who had spent much of his life exploring topics that others might call fringe. In the late 1990s, he was introduced to the skull and immediately realized he was holding something off. Not fake, not theatrical, but real and wrong, in all the ways science didn't expect. Let's describe this skull. You're lying down, maybe listening in the dark. Picture this. The cranium is larger than a normal human child's, yet the bones are significantly thinner and lighter. The eye sockets are unusually shallow, almost flat, and tilted in a way that doesn't match any known species. The back of the skull is bulbous, smooth, and symmetrical, as if it had been carefully shaped or had grown that way naturally. Now imagine holding it in your hands. It's real bone, carbon dated, from a real person or being who lived 900 years ago. Not a modern replica, not a digital fake. When Pye sent the skull for analysis, early DNA tests were confusing. The mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from the mother, was human. But nuclear DNA, which gives a full genetic picture, was mostly unreadable. Attempts to sequence it came back with fragments that didn't fit known patterns. Even after repeated efforts with improved techniques, labs struggled to match all the markers, but that didn't mean it was alien. That's important to say. What it meant was that we were looking at something that didn't match, and in science, especially in anthropology, a mismatch like that can cause discomfort, because it challenges classification, and classification is how we sleep at night. Now here's the part most people don't talk about. Many unusual skulls found around the world are later explained through a condition known as cranial deformation, a cultural practice where heads are bound during infancy to elongate them for aesthetic or ceremonial reasons. But the Starchild skull wasn't just long, it was anatomically different in ways that couldn't be explained by pressure or banding. For example, its bone was found to be about 50% thinner than typical human bone, yet far stronger. Strong enough that a surgeon commented it would be difficult to cut through using modern tools. This wasn't simply a deformed child, it was something structurally other. The frontal sinuses, completely absent. The rear of the skull, perfectly symmetrical, as if molded. The inner ear canals, unusual in length and shape. It didn't just look different, it was different. Now let's pause here. Because what's important is not whether it was alien, or hybrid, or a new subspecies. The truth is, nobody knows. And maybe that's what makes this such a perfect mystery for a sleepy evening. Because sometimes, resting in the unknown is more peaceful than racing to an answer. The skull passed through many hands, and each time the story got a little louder. Some claimed it was proof of extraterrestrial intervention. Others insisted it was simply a child with a severe congenital disorder, like hydrocephalus or progeria. But neither of those conditions matched all the features seen here. Too many things were out of place. Too many anomalies stacked together. Eventually, a private effort raised money to sequence the full genome, but by the time the results were starting to emerge, Lloyd Pye passed away in 2013, never seeing the final conclusions. What followed was a digital silence. Some updates hinted that parts of the DNA still didn't match known sequences in the human genome, but without peer-reviewed publication or access to full data, the results faded into internet archives and speculation. So what are we left with? A real skull, from a real being, with DNA that was partly human and partly unreadable, found in a real cave, in a known region, carbon dated, X-rayed, held in museums, documented by doctors, and yet when someone asks, what was the Starchild's skull, the best answer today is still, we don't know. And maybe that's enough. Because while your eyes grow heavier and your thoughts soften into dreams, you're not expected to solve this mystery. You're just invited to rest in the possibility that something stranger once walked among us. Not malevolent, not fantastical, just different. The skull still exists. It's not a storybook relic. You can find pictures, see scans, read documents. It was displayed at events, held in people's hands, and still, no one can explain how or why it grew the way it did. And so we return to where we began. A quiet cave. 2 skeletons. One normal, one that doesn't match. Maybe the next discovery will explain everything. Or maybe some mysteries are meant to simply be held, not solved. Close your eyes and let your mind drift, calmly, into that space between science and wonder. The pyramid beneath the jungle. Sometimes, the jungle keeps its secrets a little too well. There's something strange about this place. Something quiet. Not the kind of quiet you hear in an empty room. The kind that's alive, breathing, listening. The kind that watches you from behind the leaves. Somewhere in the heart of the Yucatan Peninsula, far beyond where the roads become dirt, and the dirt becomes vines. A pyramid waits. It's not just hidden, it's been swallowed. Not by time, but by trees. They call it Calakmul. And unlike the golden sands of Egypt, or the sunlit ruins of Greece, this pyramid lies beneath a living ceiling. You could walk right past it and never know. 1,000 tons of stone. Thousands of years of history, buried in plain sight. Not underground, not underwater, just forgotten. The locals had always known something was here. You don't live beside ghosts without feeling them. The forest hums differently near Calakmul. The wind bends strange, birds pause longer before singing. And sometimes, under a full moon, the branches don't sway at all, like the trees themselves are holding their breath. When archaeologists first stumbled upon it, it wasn't a discovery, it was a rediscovery. Because this wasn't just a monument, this was a city, a forgotten capital, once filled with rulers and scribes, dancers and warriors, children and old women. Now it's just trees. The main structure, Structure 2, as it's dryly named in academic papers, is among the largest pyramids in the entire Maya world. Not just tall, but wide, expansive, deep, with layers built atop layers, each level rising like a memory placed over the last. And yet, you could fly over it and never know. From above it's a hill with trees, a lump in the forest, that's all. But the moment you step closer, when you touch the stone, feel the carved edges, run your fingers along the weathered steps, you know, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. This wasn't just a building, it was a story. And stories don't die easily. Archaeologists believe Calakmul was once home to over 50,000 people. That's not a village, that's a civilization. And yet, unlike Chichen Itza or Tikal, Calakmul didn't leave behind showy ruins. It didn't reach for tourists or cling to the spotlight. It faded, softly, elegantly, like mist. What's even more haunting, the silence of it all. No grand inscriptions shouting its history. No dramatic hieroglyphs carved into walls, just fragments, symbols, quiet traces left behind like breadcrumbs. We don't even know the real name of the city. Calakmul is what modern researchers called it. But the people who built it, the ones who danced on its steps and chanted to the stars, they called it something else. And that name is lost. It makes you wonder, how many names do we forget every century? How many stories get buried not in dirt, but in disinterest? Sometimes the forest isn't hiding the ruins. Sometimes the forest is the ruins. The very trees growing here may have once been planted with purpose, aligned to sacred calendars, surrounding courtyards, framing temples. And now they stand tangled and wild, growing wherever they please, like children who've forgotten where they were born. There are chambers inside this pyramid still sealed, rooms filled with humidity and secrets. In one of them, they found the remains of a ruler, buried in a red-painted tomb, his bones stained with cinnabar, his mask made of jade, and beside him, objects that don't quite make sense, tools made from unknown materials, carvings of animals not native to the region, even small spheres, perfectly shaped, whose purpose still baffles modern scholars. Who was this man? A priest? A king? A prophet? And why was he buried in a place no one was meant to find? Sometimes when you're standing in that jungle, and you listen closely, you almost feel like the stones are speaking, not in words, but in pressure, in rhythm, in pulse, like the pyramid itself still remembers, still breathes, still waits. And as you explore deeper, you start to realize something else. This wasn't just a pyramid of stone, It was a pyramid of time. Layer upon layer, generation upon generation, each one building upon the last, never tearing down, only adding. And just like time, it grew, upward, outward, until it disappeared. You begin to feel it in your chest, that strange weight. Not fear, not awe, just the ache of forgotten greatness. Because this wasn't just architecture, this was ambition, vision, worship, legacy, and we left it behind. Maybe that's why the forest took it back so easily. It wasn't a theft, it was a mercy, a soft burial, a green shroud for a city too proud to die in the open. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? That in the end, nature doesn't destroy us. She tucks us in, softens our sharpest angles, turns our palaces into hills, our columns into trees, our footprints into moss. Maybe that's what Calakmul is, not a ruin, but a lullaby, a stone-built whisper, a memory covered in green. And in the quiet of night, as the wind hums through the vines and the moon casts its silver light on those ancient steps, one thing becomes clear: the pyramid is not gone. It's just sleeping, like the jungle around it, like the kings beneath it, like the past itself, waiting to be remembered. The forgotten city under the sand. They say the desert never forgets, but what it hides, it guards in silence. Beneath layers of dry, shifting sands beyond the reach of most eyes, once stood a city that ruled over the Nile Delta. Not just any city, a place of kings, of gold, of secrets older than most remember. Its name is Tanis. You may not hear it often in tales of Egypt, and yet, for centuries, it held power that rivaled even Thebes. Imagine walking across a lifeless stretch of Egyptian desert. There's nothing but the wind, the fine powder of sand brushing your ankles. Then suddenly, your foot catches something hard, stone, ancient, weathered, and you realize you're not alone. You're standing atop a city buried alive. Tanis was once the royal seat of the 21st and 22nd dynasties. Pharaohs walked its halls, priests whispered secrets in its temples, gold shimmered under its sun. But unlike Luxor or Giza, Tanis did not survive the fame of time. The desert, with quiet patience, swallowed it whole, and that's what makes it so haunting. It wasn't lost because it was small or unimportant. No. It was forgotten because nature insisted on silence. Year after year, the sands rose, storms blew, roofs caved, pillars cracked. Then came the quiet. A city once full of prayers, left to drift in dust. Archaeologists began uncovering its bones in the 20th century. What they found left them speechless. Tombs rivaling the treasures of Tutankhamun, royal sarcophagi, untouched, ornaments that still shimmer in museum lights today, and hieroglyphs, strangely preserved, telling stories of pharaohs who were meant to be remembered. But something felt different here. The layout of the city, odd. The burial practices, inconsistent. The statues, some reused, some intentionally defaced. It was as if someone had tried to erase something, or someone, and nature helped them finish the job. There's one theory, that Tanis was the second burial site of a disgraced ruler. Others say it was a refuge after invasions upended the usual order of the Nile. Either way, it became a shadow capital, powerful but silent, a place of secrets. Even today, not all of Tanis has been excavated. Some parts remain under sand too thick, or structures too fragile, and some believe that the greatest tombs, those of kings we've yet to name, still lie untouched beneath the dunes, waiting, sleeping. There's a kind of rhythm in ruins like these. Stone falls, wind blows, memory fades, but truth waits. Some archaeologists claim the layout of Tanis mimics celestial patterns, pointing to stars long lost from our skies. Was it a message to the gods, or perhaps from them? Satellite imagery has recently revealed strange outlines in the desert near the city, rectangles, circles, signs of deeper chambers. Some even suggest there may be underground vaults, sealed tight, wrapped in myth. But here's where it gets stranger. Unlike other Egyptian ruins, Tanis doesn't appear to have been looted extensively. The treasures found were largely untouched. It's as if even the tomb robbers stayed away, or couldn't find it, as if the city hid itself, on purpose, and the desert helped. This kind of preservation is rare, too rare. Gold typically draws scavengers, but not here, not at Tanis. The tombs here weren't just hidden, they were entombed again, by nature herself. Some whisper that Tanis holds more than just treasure, that one of the sarcophagi still sealed contains a ruler whose name was erased from history, a pharaoh who wasn't supposed to be remembered, whose memory was cursed. You see, in ancient Egypt, to erase a name from walls, temples, and tombs was to kill someone a second time, to wipe them from the afterlife, to make them vanish forever. So what could someone have done to deserve such erasure? Some of the statues in Tanis have heads removed. Others have been replaced, recarved into new kings. Chisel marks tell the story. You can almost feel the anger in the stone. And here you are now, alone. Reading this, imagining the soft wind, the warm sun, the silence, and underneath you, a king without a name, still resting, still waiting. Maybe it's better we don't wake him. Some doors are sealed for a reason, some cities are buried for protection, and some truths are just too heavy to carry into the light. So we leave Tanis where it is, not forgotten, not erased, but gently remembered, like a dream after waking, fading, but never quite gone. The chamber with walls of gold dust. There's a legend, whispered among the misty lakes and dense forests of Colombia, a city made of gold, a ritual so sacred that leaders covered themselves in precious dust and dove into water, believing that ceremony alone was enough to bring them back transformed. This is not a myth we invented. It's a story born from real artifacts, real ceremonies, real people. One of those artifacts, the Muisca Golden Raft, is held in museums today, a small model, shimmering in gallery lights, a canoe-shaped object covered in intricate figures, gold glistening in every detail. On it, you see a chieftain covered in dust, kneeling. He's surrounded by offerings, worshippers, horns, and trinkets. It's beautiful, serene, and almost unbearably heavy with meaning. This raft is the closest we have to tangible proof of El Dorado. But let me take you deeper. Imagine you're stepping into a chamber carved from earth, hidden beneath a Colombian hill. Not stone, not marble, earth. And inside, the walls are not painted. They're dusted with fine particles of gold, sparkling, glowing faintly in lamplight, like stars caught in clay. The shine is quiet, subtle, like soft embers flickering in a hearth. You are, or were, in the presence of gold dust. They say this chamber was sacred, a place where only the chosen ventured, where nothing grew, nothing moved, except the light and the dust. Some believe it was a ritual chamber. Others say it was a symbolic burial, a space that transformed mere walls into living gold. This gold, it wasn't mined, it wasn't melted, it was worn, by people who believed that by covering themselves with gold dust, they became divine, immortal, sacred. The legend of El Dorado, the Golden One, likely extends from such ceremonies. The Spanish conquistadors heard stories, rumors, descriptions, and they searched, desperately. They invaded, they plundered, they burned, all for gold that may have existed only in ceremonial moments, only in ritual dust. Because what happened in this chamber couldn't be taken. It couldn't be melted into bars, shipped to Europe. You can't mine a feeling. You can't sell a ritual. Only witness it. Only remember it. And so today, what remains, aside from artifacts like the raft, is mostly soil, clay, stones, the faint imprint of ceremonies long past. Not even ruins, not carved statues, just memory. Archaeologists have found large burial mounds near Lake Guatavita and fragments of gold offerings, but no city of solid gold, not near El Dorado, as the legend said. And yet we have the raft, and stories, and shards of gold layer that sparkle in the damp earth. Maybe that was always the point. Maybe the city wasn't made of gold bricks. Maybe it was made of gold belief. There was power in that faith, in that dust, more potent than any treasure chest. So when you listen to this in the night, when your eyes grow heavier, and your mind slows, imagine the chamber again, earth walls glowing, a single beam of lamplight catching gold specks. No sound but your breath, no movement but your pulse. You may feel a gentle tremor, not fear, curiosity, wonder, because this chamber wasn't just a room, it was a mirror, reflecting what humans placed above all else, the desire to transcend, to transform, to become more than mortal. That desire, covered in gold. You might whisper the name El Dorado tonight, thinking of cities, treasure maps, kings gone mad for gold. But what if El Dorado never existed in brick and mortar? What if it lived only in ceremonies, in golden dust, in ritual silence? And what if that chamber, with its walls of dust, not stone, is the only true door to that world? Think of the Muisca raft again. The figures around the canoe, the chieftain dusted in gold, his kneel like a prayer, his presence like a promise. That artifact traveled from lake to museum, and through it carries the echo of timeless devotion and unspoken faith. Look at it closely. Imagine its plain shape, the detail, the weight, the ritual it held. Between each figure is a gap, a space, meaning unsaid, meaning lost, yet still there. And so, as you drift, let your mind wander into that golden room. Taste the dust on your tongue. Feel the warmth of belief. Recognize the quiet sincerity of it, that ancient longing to touch something divine. That's what legends are made of, and sometimes, that's enough. The giant that fell into the river. When people speak of giants, they usually mean legends, fairy tales, the stories passed down through whispered words beside a fire. But what if some of them weren't fiction at all? What if the bones were real, and we simply weren't meant to keep them? In a remote corner of Ecuador, a farmer stumbled upon something strange after a flood carved through his land. At first it looked like driftwood, long, curved, and dark with age, but as the sunlight dried it out, the farmer realized what he'd uncovered wasn't wood, it was bone. Massive, ancient bone. A jawbone, to be precise, larger than any he'd ever seen, nearly double the size of a modern human's, with teeth that were still intact. It didn't belong to any known animal in the region, and soon, as digging continued, more bones were found. A femur over 40 inches long, rib bones that curved like the frame of a small boat, and a partial skull that didn't fit the proportions of modern man. The locals began to whisper. They remembered the old stories, the ones their grandparents told about the Gentiles, the tall ones, the ancient ones. According to the Shuar people and other indigenous tribes, these beings once walked the earth like men, but taller, much taller. Some stories say 8 to 10 feet, others, even taller. Now here was a skeleton, real, physical, unearthed by water and earth, and for a brief moment it seemed like those stories might have been true all along. Word spread fast, first to a local university, then to the press. Photos were taken, researchers were invited. Some preliminary analysis suggested the bones could be human, but vastly outsized. The leg bone alone indicated a person nearly 8 feet tall. That, of course, was biologically rare, but not impossible. Then, suddenly, the site was closed. The bones were said to have been relocated for preservation. No further details were made public. And the farmer? He stopped speaking to the press. The land was fenced off. Government officials cited safety concerns. And just like that, the discovery was swallowed again by silence. But this wasn't the first time. Thousands of miles away, in Nevada's Lovelock Cave, guano miners in the early 1900s found something equally strange. Deep within the dry cavern walls were the mummified remains of very tall individuals, reportedly over 7 feet in height, with red hair and massive skulls. The Paiute tribe of the area had long told stories of red-haired giants called the Saite Ka, who once warred with their ancestors. Archaeologists did excavate the cave. Artifacts were removed. Some were preserved in museums. But the alleged giant bones, most vanished. Only a few photos remain. Grainy, black and white images of long bones laid next to yardsticks and pickaxes. Skeptics argue these were just tall humans, perhaps people with gigantism, or misidentified animal bones. But even today, whispers persist among locals, among alternative researchers, among those who've spent their lives chasing the truth buried beneath official history. And in Ecuador, the story doesn't end with one discovery. In 2013, researchers announced the finding of another set of giant bones in Loja province. The skeletons reportedly ranged from 7 to 10 feet tall. One belonged to a woman, another to what appeared to be a man who would have stood nearly 9 feet. The bones were well preserved. Scientists took samples. Some early tests hinted they were around 600 years old, but again, soon after, the trail went cold. The bones disappeared into private labs. Journalists lost access, and no peer-reviewed publication ever emerged. What's odd is not just the bones, but the patterns. Found, announced, then buried, this time by bureaucracy. Why would such discoveries be suppressed? Theories range from the mundane to the conspiratorial. Some believe institutions fear rewriting human history, that giants don't fit the narrative of slow, gradual evolution, that such beings, if proven real, would upend textbooks, museums, and entire academic careers. Others suggest more exotic explanations, that these giants were part of a lost civilization, older than we imagine, one that predated recorded history and left behind only fragments. Some even believe the bones might not be entirely human, a separate branch, a cousin species, or something even stranger. Yet for every photo that's deleted, another emerges. For every discovery that vanishes, a rumor takes its place. In dusty drawers of local museums in Ecuador and Nevada, there may still lie bones that never made it into the spotlight. A tibia too long, a tooth too large, labeled, misfiled, or simply forgotten. And there's the real mystery. Not just in the bones themselves, but in how often the world chooses to forget them. You could stand by the river today, where that farmer first found the jawbone. The land looks ordinary now, a few trees, the sound of water, but under the soil, somewhere might still rest the rest of that skeleton, still waiting. Perhaps not everything ancient has been found. Perhaps not everything should be forgotten. Because when the earth opens unexpectedly, sometimes it reveals more than we're prepared to believe. The stone that speaks in code, it's just wood, old, cracked, dark from time. But it holds a voice no one's ever truly heard. Not because it's silent, but because we can't understand what it's trying to say. No one can. On a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far from the noise of cities or the light of highways, there once lived a people whose secrets remain almost untouched. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as the islanders called it, a place famous for its giant stone heads, the Moai. But this story isn't about the statues, it's about what was buried deeper, in time, not in soil. Sometime in the 1800s, a set of wooden tablets surfaced from this faraway land. Locals treated them carefully, like sacred relics. Their surfaces were covered in lines of symbols, tiny, beautiful and strange, carved by hand, worn by time. These weren't decorations, they were words, sentences, maybe entire histories. But here's the twist: no one could read them. Not the missionaries who came to convert the islanders, not the colonial scholars who tried to categorize the world, not the modern linguists with supercomputers and AI. These symbols, called rongorongo, don't match any known language on Earth. And what's even stranger, they appear on no other island, no other continent, no other culture. Some of the glyphs resemble birds, others look like people sitting cross-legged, some are geometric, abstract, patterns repeated with care, always carved in a unique style, known as reverse boustrophedon. That means you read one line left to right, and the next right to left, like an ox plowing a field. This style is incredibly rare. It's clever. It's deliberate. It means these weren't random marks, they were meant to be understood. But by whom? Who first carved these wooden tablets? What were they writing about? Were they prayers, histories, astronomical observations, or warnings? We simply don't know. And every year as the wood decays further, we get closer to never knowing. Some believe the tablets were part of a sacred oral tradition. They weren't meant to be read aloud, but sung, passed from priest to priest in sacred chants, which means once the last of those elders died, once the chants stopped, the meaning went with them, forever. Others say the symbols are evidence of an outside influence, that the Rapa Nui people may have had contact with a now lost civilization, maybe from South America, maybe even from farther, across oceans, across time. And here's a quiet, aching thought. What if these symbols aren't just a language, but a map? Not a literal one, but a map of how the people thought, how they saw the world, what they feared, what they loved. Imagine losing an entire way of seeing the universe, and never knowing what it looked like. Pause. You're lying down now, maybe with a soft pillow behind your head, eyes half closed. The room is quiet. The idea of a language that no one can read, sitting silently on a shelf in a museum, feels almost heavy, doesn't it? There's something haunting about words you can see, but can't hear. It's like watching someone scream through glass. And still, the tablets exist. They sit behind glass cases in museums, in Chile, in Vienna, in Santiago. Scientists take scans. Linguists debate. Some claim they've cracked pieces of it. Others say we're nowhere close. And while they argue, the story of rongorongo sleeps. One theory suggests it was a proto-writing system, a symbolic language still being developed. Another claims it's a full script, with grammar, structure, and poetry we'll never decipher. The truth is, we don't even know what kind of language it is. Is it syllabic, like Japanese? Pictographic, like ancient Chinese? Is it something entirely different? What if it's a code meant only for a chosen few? Then there's the troubling side of this mystery. Missionaries in the 1800s burned many of the tablets, believing them to be pagan relics. What they destroyed may have been the Rosetta Stones we needed to crack the code. In those flames, centuries of memory turned to ash. Some accounts say the children of the islanders were forbidden to learn the chants or the symbols, and with each forgotten word, the silence grew. Now, only a couple dozen rongorongo tablets survive. Fewer than 30. Some are split into pieces. Some are charred. All are fragile. And the language? Still locked. Still waiting. Had slow down again. Imagine for a moment being one of the scribes who carved these symbols. The island around you quiet but alive. The crash of waves. The low hum of drums in the distance. You're hunched over, pressing into wood with a shark tooth or a flint blade. You don't write in haste. You don't scribble. You carve with rhythm. Each symbol is sacred. Each mark a whisper from your ancestors. You're not just writing a story. You're preserving a soul. Now imagine that soul never being heard again. That's what rongorongo feels like. It's more than a code. It's a spirit in a bottle, drifting through time, waiting for someone who still remembers how to open it. And as your eyelids grow heavier, know this. In museums around the world, under the soft hum of security lights, the rongorongo tablets still wait. Silent, mysterious, beautiful. They may never be read again, but they are not forgotten. They are the stones that still speak in code. The black box buried in ice. It starts with silence. Not the kind of silence you find in a quiet room. This is the silence of deep time. Of a place so still, even the air feels ancient. Greenland. A frozen island blanketed by ice so thick it crushes time into layers. Every snowfall traps a memory. Every season presses the past deeper into the cold. And down there, deep in that buried past, something dark was waiting. In the 1990s, a team of researchers had set out to drill one of the longest ice cores in history. Their goal was simple on the surface: understand Earth's past climate. They weren't looking for artifacts or anomalies, just old air, trapped in bubbles, dust, pollen, and clues to ancient atmospheres. But what they found, more than 2 miles beneath their feet, was something no one expected: a black line, a smear of darkness inside the clean white ice. It shouldn't have been there. It wasn't volcanic ash. It wasn't pollution. This layer was too old and too mysterious. The ice dated back roughly 12,800 years, just as Earth was emerging from the last ice age. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, is one of the most sudden climate shifts in geological history. A time when Earth warmed and then, almost overnight, plunged back into a deep freeze. Crops failed, megafauna vanished, and in some places, entire human cultures seemed to have disappeared without a trace. And there, frozen in time, was that thin, dark layer. Like a warning, like a scar. Some scientists suggested it was soot, evidence of global wildfires, but the source of that fire? Still unclear. Others believed it came from the sky, a comet, perhaps, or a meteor. Something big enough to slam into Earth, set continents ablaze, and plunge the world into chaos. But it wasn't just the darkness that disturbed them. It was how consistent it was. This wasn't random ash from one volcano. It was global. Matching dark bands were found in Europe, in North America, even in South America, all from the same time, all telling the same story. A catastrophe had happened, one that may have changed everything. Now imagine this. For tens of thousands of years, early human cultures had been slowly growing, building settlements, understanding agriculture, trading, telling stories, forming rituals. We assume they were primitive, but what if they weren't? What if an early spark of civilization was already burning, and the black box of ice is the only trace of its end? It's a theory called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and while it's still controversial, it's gaining traction. Archaeologists at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to just after this mysterious event, believe we may be looking at the remnants of people who survived that cataclysm, who remembered the sky falling, who built great stone monuments not to celebrate, but to remember, to warn. And yet, what if that warning is still unread? The dark layer in Greenland is more than just old soot. It contains tiny spheres of melted rock, microtectites, only formed in intense heat. It contains iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids. And most disturbingly, it contains nanodiamonds, minute, super-hard particles formed under crushing pressure. You don't get nanodiamonds from forest fires, you get them from impacts. Still, the debate rages on. Critics argue the evidence isn't conclusive, but every year, more ice cores and sediment layers point in the same direction. Something happened around 12,800 years ago. Something massive, something fast, something we've forgotten. You might wonder, if such a disaster struck once, could it strike again? Could the black box buried in Greenland be more than just a record of the past? Could it be a message, a reminder that civilizations are fragile, that what we build can vanish in an instant, that the planet remembers even when we forget? Sleep now, knowing this: the ice never forgets. It holds the truth gently, layer by layer, waiting for us to listen, and when we finally hear it, we may realize we are not the first to walk this earth with wonder, with ambition, with dreams, but we may be the first with a chance to learn from the silence, and maybe avoid joining it. The cave full of crystal swords. In the north of Mexico, deep beneath the dust and sun-drenched landscape of Chihuahua, there lies a cave that looks like something imagined in dreams or perhaps nightmares. It's not marked on tourist maps. There are no souvenir shops nearby. It remains locked away beneath the surface, guarded not by stone or secret, but by heat. Crushing, suffocating heat. But when you first hear about it, it doesn't sound real. A place filled with giant crystal swords, not crystal-like, not crystal-shaped. Actual, cathedral-sized beams of selenite, pure gypsum, so large and so clear, they look like frozen pillars of light. Some of them stretch 30 to 40 feet long, weighing as much as 55 tons each. They rise from the floor, jut out from the walls, and hang from the ceiling like the remains of a shattered glass palace. Scientists didn't discover it until the year 2000, and it happened by accident. Miners at the Nika lead and silver mine were digging a new tunnel when they broke through into an air pocket. They expected dirt, maybe water. What they found instead was this massive underground cavern, a hidden room that nature had been building slowly and silently for 500,000 years. But the moment they stepped inside, they realized something wasn't right. The temperature inside the cave wasn't normal. It wasn't even survivable. The air was humid and heavy, nearly 100% humidity, and the heat surged to 136 Fahrenheit, Just minutes inside without protective gear could cause confusion, collapse, even death. Imagine that. You're standing in the middle of one of the most visually stunning places on Earth, a place no one has ever walked through before, and your body is trying to shut down just from breathing the air. The crystals glisten like ice, but they don't offer coolness. They reflect the light of your helmet lamp, shimmering in soft yellows and silvers. The air is thick with moisture, like breathing through wool soaked in steam, and the silence is complete. This place doesn't want you here, and yet, it exists. And it raises a question: how could something this massive stay hidden for so long? You'd expect a place like this to be famous, worshipped, maybe even feared, but the truth is, until modern mining equipment pierced the right layer of rock, no human had ever seen it. The cave itself is shaped like a hallway, about 100 feet long and 30 feet high. Some of the crystals are so big they could easily impale a bus, and yet they formed slowly, drop by drop, over hundreds of thousands of years. Perfect conditions, high temperature, mineral-rich water, and time. No one built this place, no one carved it, nature did. But in doing so, it created something so alien, so otherworldly, that even scientists who specialize in geology were left speechless. Many people who first saw photographs of the cave assumed it was fake. It looks like a movie set, some said. It can't be real, others wrote online. But it is. And the deeper you dig into the story, the stranger it becomes. You see, the cave's existence isn't just rare, it's almost impossible. All of the conditions had to be exactly right. Not too hot, not too cold. The water needed just enough sulfate and calcium, and it had to remain undisturbed for hundreds of thousands of years. The slightest change, and the crystals would never have formed. But here's the twist. The cave only exists because of a nearby magma chamber, a slumbering pocket of heat just beneath the Earth's crust, which means this place may never have been meant to be seen. It wasn't for us, and maybe that's why it's so deadly to visit. Scientists who've studied the cave can only spend a few minutes inside at a time. They wear refrigerated suits, breathing filtered air, and still, they have to rotate in and out quickly. Some have reported hallucinations, confusion, and even fainting after just 15 minutes. That's how oppressive it is. And yet the crystals wait, silent, unmoving, thousands of years old, and still growing. But here's where the mystery deepens. Since the cave was discovered, there have been whispers, not of the crystals themselves, but of what might be inside them. Some scientists believe microbial life, unknown, ancient bacteria, may have become trapped inside the crystals as they formed. These microbes could be over 50,000 years old, and still alive, in suspended animation. And if that's true, it means the cave doesn't just hold geological secrets, it might hold biological ones too, a frozen time capsule, from an age when humans hadn't yet drawn on cave walls. Some say the microbes could offer clues about early Earth, or even life on other planets. After all, if life can survive in these extreme, hellish conditions, maybe it could survive elsewhere too. And just when it couldn't get stranger, the cave has a sibling. Just above it, there's a second chamber, the Cave of Swords. Discovered earlier in 1910, it holds smaller crystals, still huge by any normal standard, but nothing like the ones in the main chamber. The two caves are linked, both formed by the same water system, like a double vault of natural architecture. But here's the catch. Once the mining company stopped pumping water from the area in 2015, the cave began to flood again. The crystals are now submerged, possibly safer from damage, but once again out of reach. It's almost as if nature is reclaiming its masterpiece. You can't walk inside it anymore. You can't breathe the air, or see the light bounce off crystal walls. It's gone back to sleep. But the memory remains. And the photos too. Strange, silent records of a place that feels not of this earth. As if the earth itself once dreamed, and this was the shape of its dream. The mask that wasn't just for the face. There's something eerie about how certain objects hold more than just history. You look at them, and it's like they're still watching you. Still breathing, still remembering. That's what archaeologists felt when they uncovered a burial chamber deep within the Maya lowlands. The air was still. Not from age, but from reverence, as if something in that tomb was still sacred. And at the center of it all was a face, a mask, carved from pure jade, not painted, not decorated, not worn for ceremonies or parades. This wasn't made to be seen by the living. This was created to guide the dead. The jade death mask, perfectly fitted to the face of a Mayan elite, possibly a king or high priest, looked almost too perfect, as if it hadn't aged at all, as if it was waiting for someone, or watching. The Maya didn't treat jade like jewelry. To them it was sacred breath, the essence of life. The shimmering green color wasn't just beautiful. It represented corn, the sky after rain, and the soul. In their belief, jade didn't just sit on the skin, it touched the spirit. It became the person. These masks weren't made in days or even weeks. They were labors of love, crafted piece by piece, sometimes over years. Slabs of jade, carefully cut and polished, were shaped to match the features of the deceased, sometimes with other stones, obsidian, shell, gold, to complete the design. But it was always jade that formed the core. Why jade? Because it didn't rot, it didn't burn, and it didn't fade. In their eyes, it was eternal, just like the soul it carried. But what's most fascinating is how personal each mask is. These weren't generic designs. The eyes, the mouth, the ears. They were all carefully chosen to reflect the person beneath. It's as if the Maya believed that the soul needed a face, a literal identity to travel into the next world. Now imagine this. You're inside a stone burial chamber. It's been sealed for over 1,000 years. There's no light, just your torch, no sound, except your own breath. And then you see it, a green shimmer in the dark. A face looking back at you, calm, unmoved, and somehow present. That's the feeling many archaeologists have described. Not fear exactly, but a kind of reverence, as if you've just stepped into someone else's dream. One of the most famous masks was found in the tomb of Pakal the Great, a ruler of Palenque. His jade mask was incredibly intricate, with almond-shaped eyes, curved brows, and a small open mouth. When reconstructed, it almost looks alive. Pakal died around 683 AD. Yet when you look at his mask, it's like his spirit never left. And here's the thing, these masks weren't placed on just anyone, only the most elite. Kings, high priests, nobles who were considered semi-divine. Their burials were acts of cosmic importance, filled with offerings, carvings, and symbology. The mask wasn't just a send-off, it was a resurrection. In fact, many Maya believed that through proper ritual, the mask could allow the spirit to speak again, not in voice, but through dreams, visions, or signs. That's why they were buried with the mask, but also with obsidian mirrors, sacred stones, and other relics meant to transmit messages from the other side. Some masks weren't even placed on the face but buried beside the head, like an offering to the soul, or maybe a replacement in case the original was ever lost. There are theories that the masks themselves were seen as alternate vessels, not just to carry the soul, but to become it. If the body rotted, the mask remained, a kind of second life. But here's where it gets even stranger. Across multiple tombs, archaeologists began to notice something odd. Some of the masks looked too similar, faces that mirrored each other across different burial sites. The same sharp jawline, the same brow ridge, even the same spacing of the eyes. Was this just coincidence? A shared style? Or were they replicating a specific individual? Someone legendary? Someone divine? There are whispers among scholars that these masks may have been modeled on a forgotten figure, a god, maybe, or someone the Maya believed would return. One researcher pointed out that some masks from the late classic period resemble earlier figures, rulers long dead, from dynasties thought extinct. Could it be that they were trying to preserve a bloodline not just in body, but in spirit, copying the face again and again to keep it alive? Or maybe, just maybe, they thought the mask was the key to bringing that being back. Now let's talk about how these masks were actually placed. In many burials, the jade mask was laid directly on the skull, fitted tightly over the bones, like a skin. But in others, it was found above, suspended, sometimes placed with ceremonial string, or balanced atop a funerary bundle. Some were even layered, multiple masks, one atop the other, almost like armor, almost like containment. Were they trying to keep something in, or keep something out? And still, these masks haven't decayed. Even after over 1,000 years underground, through humidity, erosion, collapse, the jade holds strong, its color remains deep. Some even glisten as if they were carved yesterday. That brings us to the belief that jade could absorb essence. The Maya had a word for breath soul, ik. They believed jade could trap and hold this breath, just like a cenote traps water. Some masks even had small holes near the mouth or nose. Were these vents, or places where breath was poured in during ritual? And what about the eyes? In many masks, the eyes are made of shell or obsidian, black, deep, reflective. They look like they're watching you, not in a metaphorical sense, but really watching. You look at the mask, and something stirs, as if it remembers. It's no wonder that in some modern Maya communities, these masks are still treated as living relics. They aren't just museum pieces. They're ancestors, guardians, spirits that haven't gone silent. In recent years, replicas of the jade death masks have been used in ceremonies, not for display, but for communion, to call upon the past, to ask for guidance. So when you see a jade mask behind glass in a museum, remember, you're not looking at just a burial item. You're looking at a soul, a preserved identity, a face that someone, over 1,000 years ago, believed would one day speak again. And maybe, it just did. The scepter with unknown power. In the heart of ancient Egypt, long before the modern world had words like electricity or technology, There existed a symbol, quietly repeated in artwork, temples, and tombs. A tall, strange staff, forked at the top, held by gods, etched into sacred walls, and whispered about in the kind of voices that never wanted to be heard by the living. This staff, most closely associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife, wasn't just a ceremonial object, at least, not according to everyone. Most visitors to Egypt's museums or ruins overlook it. They might focus on the towering pyramids, the painted coffins, the golden masks of royalty. But here's the thing, some of the most powerful mysteries weren't carved on grand monuments, they were handheld, and the staff of Osiris, it may be one of the strangest of them all. In almost every depiction of Osiris, he's shown holding a staff, a long pole, forked at the top, often accompanied by the crook and flail, symbols of kingship. But this one, the forked staff, it doesn't follow any known model of ritual tools. It doesn't look like something meant to simply represent power. Some believe it was power. Literal, functioning, purposeful. You see, ancient Egypt wasn't just a kingdom of gold and sand. It was a civilization obsessed with energy, of the body, of the stars, and possibly of the earth itself. They built with acoustics in mind. They aligned structures with the solstice and the stars. What if this staff wasn't symbolic at all? What if it was functional? Some researchers argue that the forked design could resonate sound, that the entire thing, made of a material that's since decayed or been taken, once served as a tuning device, not for music, but for resonance, something to do with vibration, healing, or even movement. Because here's what's strange. In the Osirian, an underground temple in Abydos that's supposedly tied to Osiris himself, there are stones so massive that modern cranes would struggle to lift them, stones laid with a precision we can't explain, and carved, hidden, waiting, is that same symbol, the staff. Mainstream scholars say it's all symbolic, a piece of mythology, but others ask, what if it was real? What if the myths are just misunderstood manuals? In Egyptian belief, Osiris wasn't only ruler of the dead, he was the one who knew how to return, how to regenerate, how to move between realms. If his staff had a role in that, could it have been more than ritualistic? Think of the ancient Tibetan singing bowls. When struck, they produce a low hum, something you feel as much as you hear. They affect water, they affect mood. Some believe they affect the body. Now imagine a device in ancient Egypt, carefully shaped, forked for resonance. What might it do inside a stone chamber, under the earth, at the right time of year? Could it heal? Could it change consciousness? Could it awaken something? There are ancient Egyptian reliefs that show people holding the staff out in front of them. Not upward, as if for display, but forward, like they're using it, like it's active. It's easy to dismiss that, but it's also worth considering that we don't even fully understand how the pyramids were built, and we've never found detailed blueprints for any of their major engineering marvels. Why would we expect the instructions for the staff to still exist? Some fringe theorists go further. They believe the staff was a kind of energy rod, a prototype tool, perhaps passed down or recovered from an older civilization, one that predated Egypt entirely. These are the same researchers who suggest the Osirian and other megalithic sites were already ancient by the time the Egyptians found them. To them, the staff is a clue, not of Egyptian invention, but of Egyptian inheritance. Could it be that the Egyptians inherited lost technology, not electronics, but something subtler, a way of working with sound, with energy, with forces we no longer study because we've forgotten how? And here's where it gets even more mysterious. In 1933, a little-known archaeologist working in the temple complex near Abydos claimed to have found traces of metal fragments embedded in a collapsed niche. Fragments that didn't match any known tool or ornament, but they were taken, catalogued, and never heard from again. Some say they were melted ceremonial debris. Others suspect they were part of something much larger. What we do know is this. The staff shows up in Egypt's oldest art but becomes less frequent over time, like a memory being lost, or a tool being forgotten, or buried. If the staff was just symbolic, why was it given such emphasis for thousands of years, then suddenly disappeared? Was it destroyed, hidden, or does it still exist, in a sealed tomb, in a collection, or beneath layers of Nile silt waiting for the right moment to resurface? And if someone found it, would we even recognize it for what it was? Modern technology is so focused on wires, circuits, screens, but ancient technology, if it existed, might have been about frequency, about shape, about harmony. That changes everything. Maybe the staff wasn't a weapon, or a wand, or a symbol. Maybe it was a tool to unlock something inside the temples, inside the earth, or even inside the human body. The mystery remains. What did the ancients really know? And what, exactly, was the true purpose of the scepter with unknown power? The statue that grows warm. Somewhere in the south of India, tucked among the ancient stone marvels of Karnataka, lies a temple, one that has stood for nearly 1,000 years. The Hoysala temples are known for their delicate carvings, intricate deities, and the kind of architectural detail that feels like it came from a civilization obsessed with precision. But there's one sculpture here that seems different. Not in its style, but in its behavior. Carved directly into the stone wall is a depiction of something strange, a kind of object, or perhaps a vessel, with wings, fins, and a body that doesn't resemble anything found in the natural world. It has the unmistakable shape of what some call a vimana, a flying chariot, as described in ancient Indian texts. But that's not even the strangest part. This carving, this slab of cold ancient rock, grows warm. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, actually warm to the touch, even when the rest of the temple remains cool, even when it's shaded for hours, even when no sunlight or heat has touched it at all. It doesn't burn, it doesn't sear your skin, but it feels alive, and no one can explain why. Is it something about the minerals in the rock? Something magnetic, maybe? Or is it something else? There's a kind of quiet around this sculpture. The local guides don't bring it up unless asked. The temple priests sometimes change the subject, and yet visitors from around the world come just to feel it, to touch this ancient stone and confirm for themselves that something is off. How does an unpowered carving in a centuries-old temple feel like it's holding heat from within? It's not the only depiction of a vimana in ancient Indian art. Across the subcontinent, texts like the Samarangana Sutradhara describe flying vehicles capable of moving in multiple directions. They describe flight technologies, some fueled by mercury, others by fire or wind. Some even seem to describe control panels, pilots, and weaponry. But this isn't just myth. This is a carved piece of stone in a physical temple, and it grows warm in a way no other piece of stone around it does. Some researchers have dismissed the warmth as a quirk of airflow. They say hot air trapped between stones might leak out from behind the wall, but those theories don't hold up. Not when the carving is on an exterior wall, not when other carvings beside it remain completely cold. What makes this even more unsettling is the lack of any real study. Despite its bizarre behavior, no serious archaeological body has done a deep investigation, no thermal imaging, no ground-penetrating scans, no chemical analysis. Why? Is it oversight? Or is it avoidance? The word vimana appears across Sanskrit texts, not as poetry, but as description. Detailed accounts, distances, travel time, aerial maneuvering, far too specific to be metaphor, and temples like these, they're not built randomly. Every stone in a Hoysala temple is a part of a larger system, each with symbolic meaning, yes, but also practical design. Some of them align with solar events, others hum with strange frequencies. Some even redirect sound and vibration in ways modern architects still find impressive. So when one piece of carved stone grows warm, you have to wonder if it was meant to. Imagine for a moment that the carving is more than symbolic. What if the shape itself, whatever the vimana was, held some kind of energy, even as a depiction? There are theories, fringe ones, that suggest ancient carvings weren't just decorative, that shapes, angles, and materials, arranged in precise ways, can store or conduct certain types of energy. The kind we don't fully understand yet. Energy stored not as electricity, but perhaps as vibration, as memory, as heat. We know that quartz, for example, can store energy and even data. It's used in watches, hard drives, even lasers. Could ancient builders have understood this in a way we've forgotten? When you stand in front of the warm carving, it's hard not to think about that, to wonder if this wasn't just a stone, if it was a component, a relic, or something else entirely. Some believe it's a marker, that the sculpture wasn't carved to honor a legend, but to point to something real, something once buried or lost, a prototype, a fragment, a technology mistaken for myth. Others go further. They claim that the vimana isn't symbolic at all, that ancient civilizations across the globe had access to flight, energy, and even weapons, and that their remnants have been misinterpreted as religious artifacts. And in temples like this, built with mind-numbing accuracy, you begin to understand why people believe that. The carvings themselves tell stories. Elephants born of clouds, gods descending in fire, travelers in flying ships. If you read the Mahabharata, the stories become even stranger. Descriptions of aerial battles, beams of light, and mushroom cloud-like destruction. Not metaphor, description. So when you see a vimana carved into a temple wall, and you place your hand upon it, and it's warm, your mind begins to drift, not to magic, but to memory. What if the people who built this knew something? What if they recorded it not in paper or words, but in stone? What if the vimana isn't just a symbol, but a footprint, something left behind, not to be worshipped, but to be found? And what if the heat that lingers in that carving is the last trace of what it once was? Not a god, not a myth, but a machine. One forgotten, now sleeping, still humming, softly, in stone. The wheel. No one could spin. They say the desert has its secrets, but the stone remembers everything. Tucked in the heart of Hampi, a silent monument waits in the dust. It's not grand, like a pyramid, or hidden like a crypt. It's just a wheel, but one that refuses to spin. And that mystery alone has puzzled minds for centuries. Picture it, an ancient stone chariot, carved with such precision that it almost feels out of place. The kind of precision that whispers, this shouldn't be here. Two massive stone wheels flank the chariot, not painted, not adorned, just solid, heavy rock. And yet, they aren't fused to the base. They were carved as if they were meant to rotate, but they don't. No matter how hard you push, how many tools you try, these wheels stay locked in place, unmoving, untouched by time. Some locals say the gods rode in it once. Others say it's a celestial machine, grounded by human misunderstanding. But no one really knows why this chariot exists, or how. The carvings are impossibly detailed. There are horses that never age, guardians with eyes so lifelike you could swear they once blinked. There's a sense, quiet, almost whispering, that this wasn't just built, it was left. Now here's the odd part. In other temples across India, similar chariots exist, but those are symbolic. Their wheels are fused, part of a whole, decorative. But not this one. This one's different. Even the wheels, though still, show a hint of intention, like they were made to move, like they did move long ago. Was there once a technology we've forgotten? Something that could animate stone without modern motors, wires, or gears? Something so advanced it left behind no trace because we never recognized it as tech to begin with. The platform it rests on is smooth, too smooth. Geologists say erosion could explain it, but that doesn't account for the perfect symmetry. There are no tool marks, no cuts where the stone was split. It's as if it was poured, or grown, or sung into place. And the question remains, why create a wheel that doesn't turn? Maybe it did. Not in motion, but in energy. Maybe the whole structure was part of a larger mechanism, a part of something we've lost, or simply can't see anymore. One theory suggests the chariot was once part of a celestial calendar, that it aligned with the sun, casting shadows at exact times of year. But that doesn't explain the effort, or the mystery. Why so much detail, so much precision, for something purely symbolic? Others believe the wheel itself was a kind of tuning device, that it resonated with frequencies we no longer understand, that the vibrations of certain chants or rituals could awaken it, spin it, animate it, not physically, but spiritually. It's strange to think about that a wheel could be alive. But then again, ancient cultures didn't separate life and objects the way we do. To them, stone could hold memory, metal could hold spirit, and maybe this wheel holds both. You walk around it and feel something, not heat, not cold, but presence, as if it watches back, as if it waits for someone who remembers how it once worked. There's an inscription near the base, not quite readable, weathered by time, but scholars believe it may have once been a set of instructions, or a warning. But it's broken now, half missing, half buried. Some say the British tried to take it during the colonial era, that they tried to move the wheel, but every time, something went wrong. A pulley would snap, a rope would fray. One story claims an officer went blind trying to carve it loose. Whether true or not, the wheel never moved, and so it stayed, locked in place, forgotten by most but never quite silent. There's another legend, whispered more than written, that says the wheel isn't locked, it's sealed, waiting. That one day, when the right person touches it, it will turn again, not forward, but backward, turning not time, but memory. And with it, the knowledge of how we once built things we can no longer understand. What if the wheel was never meant to spin in this world? What if it was a key, or a lock, or both? You walk away from it slowly, and the breeze picks up around the old stones. The dust settles again, and the wheel waits. It's still not moving. But maybe, just maybe, something beneath it is. The cube that shouldn't exist. They didn't know what they were digging toward. It was just another day at the coal-fired plant in Vöcklabruck, Austria. A worker in the 1800s, feeding ancient compressed matter into the fire, opened a seam in a block of coal that hadn't been touched in millions of years. And there it was. A small, strange metal object, shaped like a cube, smooth, with sharply defined edges and ridges. No writing, no decoration, but unmistakably shaped, machined, purposeful. It had weight, it was metallic. But the coal it came from? The coal dated back 20 million years. So how did it get in there? To this day, this artifact is called the Salzburg Cube, or the Wolf's Egg Iron. And nobody has ever truly explained how a shaped, smelted, metallic object ended up in prehistoric coal. Coal that existed before humans, or anything like us, even walked the earth. And maybe that's why some believe this artifact isn't just unusual, it's impossible. Now, let's slow it all down. Let's take a soft breath and wonder, not just what this object is, but how many others have been lost, burned, forgotten, or quietly tucked away. Because if this one cube slipped through the cracks, what else might have? The object is small, about the size of a fist. It's dark gray in color, dense, and strangely geometric. The sides appear too perfect, too symmetrical, for a natural mineral formation. In fact, it looks less like a rock, and more like a machine part, like a casing, a fragment of something larger. The cube has a deep groove running around its midsection, almost like it was once part of a mechanism. In 1886, an Austrian mining authority named Archaeological analyzed the cube. His conclusion: it wasn't natural, it wasn't a fossil, it wasn't a lump of meteorite or a chunk of ore. It was iron, hardened, smelted iron, alloyed with nickel, and it showed signs of casting or machining. But metallurgy? In the Miocene era? That's over 20 million years ago. There were no humans, no tools, no civilization. So how did a manufactured object end up inside a prehistoric coal deposit? Some scientists say, contamination, maybe it fell in somehow later. But geologists counter, no, the coal seam was sealed, compressed, formed naturally over millions of years, under pressure, under layers of earth. There's no known way for a modern object to have slipped inside and become fully embedded, with no visible break in the layer. And so, this lonely little cube remains what it always was, a mystery with no agreed explanation. Now, just imagine, you're holding it in your hand, this dark little shape, its edges cool, its weight unexpected. The moment you touch it, your mind begins to race. Who touched it before you? Not the miners, not even early humans, but someone, or something, long, long before our kind arrived. What if it wasn't from here at all? One theory is particularly wild, but curiously persistent. It suggests the cube isn't just from Earth's deep past, but from somewhere else entirely. Not a relic of an early civilization, but a relic of another one. Visitors, watchers, or even an earlier cycle of human-like intelligence that came before us, rose, built, and vanished, leaving behind only metal echoes in rock. What if human history isn't a straight line, but a cycle? In the 1960s, the Salzburg Museum displayed the cube in its natural history collection. But as interest grew, and fringe theorists began writing about it, the object was quietly removed. It still exists today, kept in a museum vault, but it's no longer public. Why? Some say it's because the artifact makes no sense, it doesn't fit the timeline, and the fewer people that ask about it, the better. But others say it's hiding something even more profound, that the world's ancient past isn't missing because we haven't looked hard enough. It's missing because it's been erased. You can feel it now, can't you? That strange hum of mystery, like you've just brushed up against something your mind wasn't made to hold, like seeing a machine on the moon, or a footprint in rock, where no foot should have ever stepped. The Salzburg cube is small, but its questions are enormous. What if our version of history, the straight line from caveman to skyscraper, is wrong? What if civilizations don't rise once, but many times? And what if, each time they rise, they fall again, erased by time, buried beneath layers of earth, until only traces remain, a cube in coal, a whisper in stone, a story no one knows how to finish. And so we lie back, and we drift off, not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with wonder. Because the cube that shouldn't exist, still does. And maybe, so do others. The bell that rang in silence. There's something strange about silence. When you sit with it long enough, it begins to feel heavy, thick, like air that's been holding its breath for centuries. Now imagine that in the depths of the earth, buried beneath centuries of forgotten soil, you discover a bell. Not rusted, not broken, but still whole, still waiting. It was found in China, in the ruins of the ancient Zhou dynasty, long before paper, before iron, before the Great Wall had ever touched the sky. And yet, this bell is no ordinary relic. It carries a voice, a tone. 2 tones, in fact. When struck, gently, deliberately, it sings out not one note, but 2, clear, resonant. One rising, one falling, in perfect harmony, and no one knows how. This is a bell that shouldn't be able to do what it does. It's not electric, it's not digital, it's not designed with modern tuning forks or complex sound chambers. It was cast more than 2,000 years ago, in a time when bronze was still a new magic. Archaeologists call them bianzhong, bronze bells used in ancient Chinese rituals and court ceremonies. But this particular one was unlike the others. You see, most bells ring with a single pitch. It vibrates, echoes, fades. But this bell holds something more, a secret embedded in the way it was shaped. Its sides are uneven, not flawed, designed. One curve dips just slightly more than the other. One corner is thicker. The pattern of this asymmetry is deliberate. And that subtle design makes music, not noise, not clangs, but real, layered resonance. A tone that sounds almost human. The strange part, the people who made this bell didn't have what we would call musical notation. They didn't have tuning apps or oscilloscopes, yet they knew, down to the angle, the width, the alloy mixture, exactly how to create two notes from one strike. One sound for heaven, one sound for earth. That's what some researchers believe, that it was symbolic, spiritual. A way to mirror the duality of existence, body and soul, above and below. Others say it was practical, an instrument of court music, played by teams of musicians, lined up with rows of bells hanging from ornate wooden racks, each one struck with wooden mallets, each one singing a unique tone, or two. But here's the thing, even today, we struggle to replicate that precision without advanced modeling. We can scan the bell, we can measure the frequencies, we can map the curves and metal thickness down to the micrometer, but to make one just like it, that's still not so easy. Because it wasn't just forged, it was crafted, with purpose, and maybe with knowledge we've lost. The bell doesn't just sit silently in a museum now. It's been studied, x-rayed, acoustically tested. When researchers first tapped it lightly in the lab, they didn't expect much, just a dull chime, a relic's last breath, but what they got instead was music. A low humming foundation, followed by a faint, higher shimmer, riding just above it. Two frequencies, two voices, one instrument. It left the room quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that's not empty but full, like the bell had just spoken something forgotten, and everyone there had heard it. Some claim this acoustic ability was intentional, an advanced understanding of resonance thousands of years ahead of its time. Others quietly wonder if the bell was meant to mimic something else. A celestial tone, a universal hum, the kind of sound that lives not in ears, but in the bones. In ancient China, sound was more than entertainment. It was cosmology, order, balance. The wrong sound could disrupt harmony. The right tone could align rulers with the heavens. So maybe this bell wasn't just for music. Maybe it was a tuning device, not for instruments, but for the soul, for temples, for time. Imagine a dark stone chamber, candlelight flickering, priests standing in stillness, and one single strike of the bell, echoing across the walls like thunder wrapped in velvet. Two tones, one call, one reply, and then silence again. Not every bell from the Zhou era had this dual-tone property. Only a few have been found. Most are damaged, corroded by centuries of earth and rain, but this one survived. Not by accident, but maybe because someone wanted it to. Somewhere between craftsmanship and intention, this bell became a message. Not just from the past, but from people who understood something we've forgotten. That sound is not just heard, it's felt. That silence is not the absence of noise, but the presence of everything waiting to be said. And maybe that's why it still rings. Even after centuries in the dirt. Even after its creators have vanished. Even after the world has changed. The bell waits. Quiet. Still. Whole. Until someone, like you, is ready to listen. The helmet that hears the sky. It was found in the cold. Not the kind of cold that nips at your fingers or sends a shiver through your coat. This was the kind of cold that has weight to it, that seeps into your bones, curls up in your lungs, and lingers. A high plain in Siberia, empty, windswept, quiet in a way that feels ancient. The archaeologists were careful. They always are when it comes to burial mounds like this. You don't rush when the ground you're digging into hasn't been disturbed in over 2,000 years. You listen, you brush, you feel the silence as if it's alive. They were expecting bones, maybe some rusted tools, a few gold beads if they were lucky. What they found was something else. It was gold, yes, but not jewelry, not coins. It was a helmet, or maybe a crown. But it didn't look like any war helmet we've seen in museums. It had no padding for protection, no space for a strap. It wasn't made for fighting. It was shaped like a half-circle dome, solid, heavy, real. But at the top were spires, long, thin antenna-like rods, extending upward like the feelers of some forgotten insect god. And etched into the band were strange, curling symbols, spirals, eyes, lines that meant something, but to whom? They called it a Scythian crown. The Scythians were nomads, fierce warriors who rode horses across the steppes long before Rome ruled Europe. Their burial mounds are scattered across Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and in some, like this one, we find gold that's never tarnished, stone that's never cracked, buried deep under frozen earth. But this one, this crown, it was warm. No, not glowing, not hot to the touch, but warm in a way that didn't make sense. Everything else around it, bones, tools, even the soil, was ice cold. But this, it seemed to resist the cold, like it remembered the sun. Some scientists dismissed it, saying the gold conducts heat differently, that it absorbed body warmth during handling, that the temperature shift was nothing more than mechanics. But some weren't so sure. One of the archaeologists, a woman in her 60s who had excavated sites her whole life, said that when she first touched it, she heard something, a hum, so faint she thought it was tinnitus, but it stayed with her, long after she left the site, a soft resonance like wind through wire. Another researcher swore that the crown vibrated slightly when storms rolled in, that it responded to the sky. That's when people started calling it the helmet that hears the sky, and they meant it literally. In ancient Scythian belief, the sky wasn't just weather, it was divine. The heavens were a place you listened to, not just looked at. Messages from the stars, the gods, the ancestors, they came on wind and thunder, and this crown, it wasn't just for ceremony. Some think it was a receiver. We laugh, of course. How could something 2,000 years old receive anything? There were no radios, no electricity, no technology, just horses and spears and campfires. But then we remember the Antikythera mechanism, the Baghdad battery, the perfectly carved spheres of Costa Rica, the metal spheres from South Africa, with perfectly etched grooves that predate tools. And maybe, just maybe, we realize that we've underestimated what ancient minds were capable of. When metallurgists examined the crown, they found traces of materials not native to the area, alloys that would have required intense heat to create, too intense for the kinds of furnaces the Scythians supposedly had access to. Some even claimed the proportions of the antenna matched harmonic frequencies, like tuning forks, like instruments built not just for beauty, but for sound. And sound is vibration, and vibration is energy. Could it have been part of some ritual, a way to connect with the cosmos? Or was it something else? Some believe the Scythian kings were more than rulers. They were interpreters, mediums, people who could commune with the sky, who wore symbols of their role not for show, but for function. Not a helmet for war, but a device for listening. We've tried to recreate it. Modern engineers have built replicas. Some place them in wind tunnels, others attach them to sensitive microphones. Some report faint signals, whispers in the white noise. Still others hear nothing. But what do you hear if you listen right now? Not with your ears, with your imagination. Picture the wind racing across the Siberian plain. The sky overhead, big and blue and endless. The stars, bright and silent. The snow underfoot. The weight of history pressing down, and yet something, reaching up. A gold crown, spires touching the air. Waiting. It rests now in a museum, under glass, temperature controlled, studied, scanned, measured, but none of that answers the real question. Why did someone make this? Who decided that a crown should reach to the sky? And what were they trying to hear? Maybe it was nothing, a symbol of power, a decorative piece buried with a forgotten king. But maybe it was more. Maybe in a time before records, before cities, before the stories we wrote down, people were already trying to speak to something larger. And maybe, just maybe, this helmet listened back. The mirror that refuses reflection. It looks like a simple bronze disc, the kind of object you'd walk past in a museum without a second glance. Worn down, dull, silent. Just another relic from a time we believe we understand. But this mirror doesn't behave like anything we'd expect. Discovered in tombs dating back more than 2,000 years, during China's Han Dynasty, these so-called magic mirrors were meant to be placed with the dead, artifacts to carry into the afterlife. But this mirror, wasn't made for vanity. It was never meant to show your reflection. In fact, it almost seems to resist it. It's when a beam of light strikes the polished side, just right, that the mirror finally speaks. Projected on the wall behind it, in soft reflected light, are images, shapes, words, entire scenes, that are completely invisible to the naked eye when you look at the surface directly. Nothing about this makes sense. The images appear through the metal, not from on it. There's no etching, no grooves, no carving on the reflective face of the mirror. It looks blank, but it isn't. Something is encoded inside the metal itself. When light passes over its polished face, the mirror behaves more like a lens, a conduit, as if it's remembering something it was told to hold in secret. Many mirrors show dragons, ancient script, even depictions of celestial events, stars, constellations, comets frozen in a moment long past. But again, none of this appears on the face of the mirror itself. It's only in the reflected light, as if the mirror's soul, not its surface, is what holds the truth. Modern scientists have tried to replicate it. The prevailing theory is that the mirror's back, often decorated, somehow caused tiny, near-invisible warps on the front side as it was being cast. Those micro-deformations are too small for the human eye to detect, but the mirror still subtly bends the light that hits it, revealing what was engraved behind. But even that explanation isn't quite satisfying, because these mirrors weren't just cast carelessly. They were made with precision, purpose, intention. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. And there's no record, no text, no scroll, no manual, describing the technique used. The knowledge was passed by hand, disappeared before it could be written. What's most chilling, though, is the feeling people report when they stand in front of one. You see your own reflection, yes, but it's distorted, not like a funhouse mirror, more like, it hesitates, as if the mirror is unsure what face it's supposed to be showing. Sometimes, if you're standing just slightly off-center, you disappear altogether, your face vanishes. The room stays intact behind you, but your image fades into the bronze. And then there's the projection. Let's say a museum light glances off its face. On the far wall, a dragon appears, its body curled, claws out, mid-flight. But if you turn the mirror slightly, the image vanishes, or becomes something else, almost like the mirror is choosing which face to reveal. Some mirrors have shown moving stars, as if the images aren't static at all. Museum staff in Kyoto and Beijing have reportedly seen slight shifts in the projected images over time, constellations out of place, symbols that weren't visible the year before, as if the metal is remembering differently. There's one famous example, a mirror unearthed from a Han Dynasty tomb in Luoyang. When tested under high-powered museum lights, the mirror projected an image of what looked like a map, not a traditional Chinese map. This was top-down, three-dimensional, with markings no one recognized. Scholars tried to match it to known regions, maybe ancient cities, mountain ranges, but nothing fit. Until one physicist proposed an eerie theory. What if it wasn't a map of Earth? What if it was something seen from above? The room fell quiet when he said it, because the mirror wasn't pointing at the wall, it was angled upward, toward the ceiling, toward the sky. There are, of course, skeptics. Some say it's a trick of the light, pareidolia, our brains seeing shapes where none exist, but you can tell when someone's seen it for the first time. They stop speaking, they stare longer than they expect, and when they look away, there's something in their eyes, a subtle unease. They've seen something they can't explain, in metal over 2,000 years old. And here's the strange thing, magic mirrors don't appear in Chinese records as magical objects. They're often listed alongside tools, celestial instruments, not as decoration, but as instruments of measurement, possibly for watching the heavens, or perhaps for contacting what lies beyond it. In some cases, the projected images include diagrams that resemble early representations of constellations we didn't formally recognize until the modern era. Orion, Scorpius, even galaxies rendered in spiral-like patterns that mirror modern telescope views. So how did they know? Or a better question, who was the knowledge for? Some researchers believe these mirrors were funerary devices used to help guide the soul. Maybe the mirror didn't reflect your face because it wasn't made to. It was made to reflect your spirit, to show the truth that lies beyond this world. Or perhaps it served as a message, from the dead to the living. An ancient astronomer looking up at the night sky, carving what he saw into the back of the mirror, hoping that when the light hits it just right, someone in the far future would receive the message. And here we are, still receiving, still trying to understand what they were telling us, in a dark museum room, with nothing but a polished disc and a beam of quiet light. Sometimes, the clearest messages come not from reflections, but from what refuses to reflect at all. The box that echoes nothing. They didn't expect silence to feel this loud. Deep beneath the earth, far from the noise of the world above, archaeologists entered a chamber they believed was just another forgotten tomb. But what they discovered instead wasn't something visual, it was something missing. At the center of the chamber stood a large rectangular stone box, about the size of a small car. Nothing ornate, no symbols, no carvings, just smooth, dull stone. But when one of the researchers leaned in, jokingly yelled into the opening, they all froze. There was no echo, not even a faint one. In most underground spaces, sound bounces, stone reflects it, voices echo, whispers carry. But here, it was like the sound was swallowed, like it had never existed at all. Even their footsteps softened, breaths felt quieter, and when someone clapped, just once, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was unsettling. Later, the box was scanned. Its dimensions weren't random. Every wall, every curve, every angle had been calculated with eerie precision, as if someone or something had designed it not for the eye but for the ear. The stone it was made of, a blend not native to the surrounding region, a mix of minerals known for their sound-dampening properties. Some experts say the material was thousands of years ahead of its time in terms of acoustic design. But how could that be? Some proposed it was a coincidence, that erosion or natural processes shaped it this way over time. But there was a problem with that theory. The box wasn't broken, it wasn't worn, it was perfectly preserved, deliberately shaped. The edges weren't eroded, they were carved. And then there were the temperature fluctuations. Visitors standing too close for too long often felt a strange shift in their body heat, as if the box was drawing warmth or reacting to presence. One researcher claimed her watch stopped working while standing next to it. Others reported a gentle buzzing in their ears, like a low frequency only the body could sense, not hear. The chamber became a place of curiosity and caution. Sound engineers brought in their tools: microphones, decibel meters, frequency detectors. They tried music, whispers, recorded loops. Every time, the result was the same: silence. Not even feedback from their devices. One said it was as if the box ate sound, and then came a breakthrough, or maybe something worse. A researcher placed a small speaker inside and played back a sequence of pure tones, frequencies often used in resonance tests. After a few seconds, the speaker stopped working. Not burned out, just dead. Later examination found no damage. The speaker worked fine outside the box, but inside, something prevented vibration entirely. That was when someone called it a dead chamber. Not just acoustically silent, but inert, non-responsive. It didn't just reflect nothing, it resisted interaction. So why build a box like this? Theories vary. Some think it was a ritual object, meant to quiet the mind or simulate death. The ancient version of sensory deprivation, a way to reach altered states of consciousness. No light, no sound, just yourself, your breath, your heartbeat. Others wonder if it was built to contain something, not sound, but something else. Something dangerous, something ancient, like a vessel for energy, or a prison. One fringe theory even claims it was an ancient machine, a sound-based device. Not for capturing or amplifying, but canceling. Designed by a civilization that understood resonance, vibration, and human perception on a level we're only beginning to study. If you stand near it long enough, some say you'll begin to feel strange, like time is slowing, like you're shrinking into the space around you. One visitor described it as falling inward, and those who dared sit inside, even just for a moment, reported something more chilling: the sensation of being watched, not by someone outside the box, but from inside it, a presence. It didn't speak, it didn't move, but it was there. One researcher sat in the box for just 90 seconds before stumbling out, pale and shaking. He refused to go back in. When pressed, all he said was, "It doesn't want me in there." Today, the box remains underground, too heavy to move, too strange to forget. Some say it's a message from the past, proof that the ancients understood not just how to build, but how to manipulate human perception. Others believe it's an artifact from something non-human altogether. Whatever it is, it holds one power few objects on Earth ever have: silence. Total, perfect, unnatural silence. And in that silence lies a mystery that refuses to echo back. The coin with the wrong emperor. In the world of archaeology, coins are among the most valuable artifacts we ever find. They are timekeepers, storytellers, and silent witnesses of civilizations long gone. Every tiny detail, the image, the lettering, even the shape, can tell us something about a ruler, a kingdom, an economy, or a belief system. That's why when a single coin surfaces with a face that no historian can identify, it becomes a mystery that shakes the foundation of what we thought we knew. This particular coin came to light quietly. It didn't emerge from a grand tomb or some government-funded excavation. It was discovered in a modest collection by a private collector in Europe, buried among hundreds of other Roman coins. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a bronze alloy, a little worn, typical for a coin that had passed through many hands. But when the face was examined more closely, the story became anything but typical. The man on the coin was dressed like an emperor, a laurel crown wrapped tightly around his curls, his face shaped with that familiar Roman realism, stern, mature, commanding. But the name, the inscription carved along the coin's rim, matched no known emperor in the entire recorded line of Roman rulers. Not one ancient text mentioned him. No statues, no mosaics, no battle records or family trees. Just this coin, this single, solid, stubborn piece of metal suggesting that someone ruled who wasn't supposed to. Experts thought maybe it was a misstrike, a factory error, so to speak. But that theory didn't last long. The quality of the engraving was too precise. The face wasn't copied from any other coin. The lettering wasn't jumbled or reversed. It looked deliberate, and the metal composition matched Roman standards from the mid-3rd century. This was a real Roman coin, featuring someone history forgot. The coin bore a name, Spontianus. To the average person it means nothing, but to numismatists, those who study currency, it rang hollow. No record of any Spontianus ruling Rome, no commander, no governor, nothing. And yet the coin looked real. What made things even more bizarre was the location where coins like this were supposedly found: Transylvania, modern-day Romania, far from Rome, far from the Senate, but still under Roman rule during the empire's peak. Could it be that during a chaotic period, someone declared themselves emperor in isolation. A ruler with no support from Rome, but full control over a distant outpost. Some historians believe that during the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the Roman Empire nearly collapsed, many generals and commanders across the empire began declaring themselves emperors in their own regions. It was a chaotic era, with over 25 men claiming imperial power in a single 50-year stretch. Sampsionius might have been one of these shadow emperors, lost to history because his rebellion was short-lived, or because Rome wiped him from memory intentionally. But why only one coin? Normally, emperors minted tens of thousands of coins to spread their face and name, propaganda in a way. So why does only one Sponsionius coin seem to exist? And why was it found with other real Roman coins, suggesting it was used and circulated, even if briefly? Some scholars propose another possibility, that it was a local minting, a kind of emergency currency, in isolated provinces. If central coin shipments didn't arrive, soldiers and local governments sometimes created their own money using whatever tools and materials they had. This could explain why the Sponsionius coin was made with care, but didn't match the usual Roman mass production. Then there's the most chilling possibility, that Sponsionius was real, but purposefully erased. Throughout history, when a ruler was overthrown or disgraced, their images were destroyed, their statues toppled, their names chiseled out of stone. The Romans even had a term for it, damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. Maybe Sponsionius wasn't forgotten by accident. Maybe he was erased on purpose. If true, this would make the coin even more valuable, not for its metal, but for what it represents. The only surviving memory of a man who once ruled, however briefly, and was erased from every scroll and inscription Rome left behind. There's something eerily powerful about holding a coin in your hand, and knowing the face staring back at you might be the only trace of a lost emperor. A face that millions once saw in markets, in temples, in the hands of soldiers, now seen only by a few. A ghost ruler, pressed into metal. The coin has since undergone extensive analysis, microscopy, chemical testing, 3D scanning, and the more scientists study it, the more they believe it's not a forgery. The wear patterns suggest it was handled, spent, dropped. The corrosion matches genuine Roman-era coins. The lettering style is consistent with the mid-200s. Still, no other copies have been found. If Sponsionius ruled, where was his palace? Where is his tomb, his army, his laws, his legacy? And yet, maybe that's what makes the mystery so haunting, the idea that someone could lead, conquer, command, and still be forgotten, that even emperors can vanish, all but one tiny coin left behind. It makes you wonder, how many rulers like him were lost to time? How many names once echoed through marble halls but now live only in one quiet artifact, buried in a drawer, or buried beneath the soil? The sands of time don't care who you were. They cover everything eventually, unless something slips through. And in this case, that something is a coin with the wrong emperor. The disc with a code we can't crack. In the heart of an island that once stood at the center of ancient Mediterranean trade routes, a slab of fired clay lay buried beneath centuries of dust. It wasn't gold. It wasn't jewel-encrusted. It wasn't hidden in a temple, or buried in a royal tomb. And yet, what was carved into its surface would become one of the most baffling puzzles in the history of archaeology. The year was 1908. An Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier was excavating the ruins of the Minoan palace at Phaistos, on the island of Crete. The site was already yielding remarkable artifacts, pottery, frescoes, linear scripts that hinted at a sophisticated civilization. But then, deep within a basement room, under rubble and debris, something odd appeared. A disc. Clay. About 15 centimeters in diameter. Slightly convex, like a pressed biscuit, and on its surface, a spiral of symbols, stamped rather than carved. Dozens of them, looping from the edge to the center, on both sides of the disc. Each symbol was crisp and deliberate. There were helmeted heads, plumed birds, flowers, arrows, axes, each one repeated with intention, like a kind of alphabet. But it wasn't linear A. It wasn't linear B. It wasn't Greek, Egyptian, or Phoenician. It wasn't anything. It was new. Or, more accurately, it was old, far older than anyone could place, but completely foreign to any known language. To this day, no one has deciphered it. At first, it seemed like it might be a simple syllabary. That's how linear B was eventually cracked. It used signs to represent sounds. But the Phaistos disc was something else entirely. The symbols weren't scratched by hand. They were pressed. That alone was extraordinary. This wasn't scribbled in haste or chiseled one by one. It was stamped, like a kind of movable type, thousands of years before Gutenberg printed a Bible in Europe. That fact alone raises questions. How did someone in the Bronze Age develop a method of printing using standardized symbols on a clay disc? Why haven't we found other discs like it? Where are the matching stamps, the molds, the context? This disc with its stylized pictograms doesn't seem to belong to any other artifact from the time. It was found completely alone, no copies, no matching language, no parallel texts. It stands outside the entire written record of the ancient world. Some have called it a calendar. Others say it's a hymn, a ritual, a prayer, a game board, even a code. Some researchers have tried statistical analysis, frequency models. They've counted the number of repeated symbols, compared placement patterns, and looked for anything that could resemble grammar. Still nothing. Over 240 symbols appear on the disk, divided by lines into word-like groupings. Some symbols repeat multiple times, others only once. And yet, even with all the computational power we now have, no one can say with certainty what it says, or even if it says anything at all. What if it's not a language? Some argue it might be an early form of musical notation. Others suggest it's not meant to be read linearly at all, but spatially, like a map, a dance, a ritual sequence. There are theories that it encodes gestures, steps, movements. But again, without another artifact to compare it to, we're left in the dark. There's also the possibility that it's a hoax. Some scholars have raised the idea, controversial though it may be, that perhaps the Phaistos disc was created in more modern times and planted during excavation. But this theory hasn't gained much ground. The material has been dated, and it fits. The style, the composition of the clay, the context in which it was found, everything points to its authenticity. If it is a forgery, it's one of the most elaborate and effective in archaeological history, and so, it sits in a museum in Heracleion, behind glass. Not large, not grand, but utterly baffling. Some visitors stand before it for minutes, others stare for hours. Not because they can read it, but because they can't. There's a kind of quiet awe in confronting something that refuses to explain itself. We live in a world where answers are often just a click away. But the Phaistos disc reminds us that not everything is knowable. Some messages, if this is one, weren't meant for us, or perhaps their meaning was lost when the last person who could read them passed into dust. It opens a larger question. How much have we truly forgotten? How many languages died with no translation? How many rituals were performed for generations, and then vanished overnight, never recorded, never passed on? How many whole systems of meaning have turned to dust beneath our feet, leaving only fragments like this behind? The Phaistos disc isn't just about symbols on clay. It's a relic of silence, a reminder that human memory is fragile, that even the most intentional marks can lose their voice, and that time does not guarantee understanding. Some try to animate the disc in simulations, testing how it might have been used, whether it was spun, recited, chanted, but all of it remains speculation. Every theory opens new questions. Why is the sequence laid in a spiral? Is it a journey inward or outward? Is the direction of reading left to right, right to left? Clockwise? Does it even matter? In a strange way, the disc has become more powerful because it resists interpretation. If it were translated tomorrow, if we knew it said something mundane, list of temple goods or tax record of barley shipments, would it lose its mystique? Possibly, but until then, it holds a place of rare mystery in the catalog of human history. When we look at it, we aren't just trying to decipher a message, we're confronting our own limits. The disc is a symbol of a forgotten mind, a lost hand, a logic unlike our own. It's humbling. It doesn't shout, it whispers, in a language we can't hear. And perhaps that's why it still holds our attention after more than 100 years. The clay is cracked, the edges are worn, the symbols are sharp but silent, yet it speaks, not in words but in wonder. We don't know who made it, we don't know why, we don't know what it says, but it endures, waiting patiently for the day someone, somewhere, might finally understand. Until then, it remains what it always was, a code we can't crack, a voice from the past, frozen in clay, and one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. The candle that wouldn't burn out. Imagine walking into a tomb that hasn't been opened in over 1,000 years. The air is dry, dust clings to every stone, the silence is absolute. But there, at the far end of the chamber, behind a crumbling altar, something glows. Not gold, not light seeping through a crack in the wall. It's a flame, a small flame, quietly flickering inside a glass container, still alive, still burning. Despite the sealed tomb, despite the centuries, that's what a group of 17th century tomb raiders claimed to find when they broke open a Roman crypt outside Naples. A single lamp, still lit, inside a chamber that had been undisturbed since the early empire. Most would dismiss that claim as superstition or embellishment, but then you look closer, and you find it's not the only story like this. In fact, there are dozens, scattered across Roman, Greek, Persian, and even early Christian records of so-called ever-burning lamps. Lamps that were found burning in sealed tombs, temples, or caves, with no fuel, no wick replacements, and no access to oxygen. How could that be possible? How could fire survive inside an enclosed space for hundreds of years? And if these accounts were real, who built these lamps? What technology did they use? And why is there no trace of that knowledge today? Let's start with the earliest mentions. The ancient Roman historian Plutarch wrote about a lamp found burning in the temple of Jupiter Ammon in Egypt. The temple had been sealed off for centuries. No one had entered, and yet the lamp was still lit until it was exposed to air and suddenly died. Another story comes from the writings of St. Augustine, who mentioned a lamp in a temple to Venus that had supposedly been burning for over 600 years. He admitted he couldn't explain how it worked, and even during the Middle Ages, long after the fall of Rome, stories kept surfacing. One monk wrote about a tomb unearthed in Antioch where a flame burned inside a sealed bronze box. The moment the box was cracked open, the flame vanished. It's easy to chalk these stories up to legend, but some were documented by early scientists. In 1600, a scholar named Fortunio Lassetti published a book called De Lucernis Antiquorum on the lamps of the ancients. He didn't just collect stories, he tried to recreate the effect. He proposed that the ancients may have used secret mixtures of chemicals or metals that reacted slowly over time, almost like a primitive battery or chemical fuel cell. One modern hypothesis suggests the use of asbestos wicks soaked in slow-burning oil blends. Asbestos, being fire-resistant, could help sustain a tiny flame for months, maybe even years. But centuries? That's something else entirely. And there's another detail that keeps repeating across many of the ancient accounts. The lamp only stops burning when exposed to modern air. Almost as if the seal itself, the vacuum, the environment, played a role in preserving the flame. One possible explanation? These were not ordinary flames. Some scholars have speculated that these weren't fire-based lamps at all, but rather some kind of chemical luminescence or even radioactive glow, rare, but not impossible. There are natural substances, like white phosphorus, radium salts, or mixtures of calcium sulfide, that glow in the dark under certain conditions. If ancient priests had access to these minerals and knew how to seal them safely, perhaps what looked like a flame was something more exotic. But here's where it gets even stranger. Several tombs in Italy and Greece have yielded containers with carbon residue inside them, signs of slow-burning material, even though the tombs themselves were sealed airtight. Archaeologists often dismiss them as symbolic, offerings maybe, or decorative. But others wonder, were these failed experiments in eternal flame? Did the ancients try, over and over, to make something that would burn forever? Think about why they'd even want to do this. In Roman and Egyptian belief, the journey of the soul didn't end at death. A flame was symbolic. It lit the path through the underworld. To have that flame last eternally was to protect the soul forever. And so they built tombs with traps, with false doors, with cursed inscriptions, but also with flames. Some researchers point to the writings of Heron of Alexandria, a Greek engineer who lived around the 1st century AD. He built machines powered by steam, water pressure, even pneumatics. One of Heron's inventions was a self-fueling lamp, a flame that could replenish its oil from a hidden reservoir using gravity and siphons. It wasn't truly eternal, but it was clever. So now we have something intriguing. We know ancient engineers could build self-fueling mechanisms. We know they had access to unusual chemicals and minerals. We know they were obsessed with the symbolism of flame and eternity, and we have scattered accounts across cultures and centuries of flames found where no flame should have survived. But there's one more layer to this. Some of these so-called eternal flames were protected by geometric structures. One was said to be hidden inside a cube-shaped altar that used polished bronze surfaces to focus sunlight into a central chamber, keeping the wick warm even at night through thermal storage. Another lamp was described as being sealed in a glass orb filled with divine air, possibly a vacuum. The flame inside wasn't yellow, but blue. Which raises the question, were these lamps just funerary tricks, or were they tapping into a kind of energy we don't fully understand? It's tempting to imagine some lost science, a discovery forgotten, or perhaps hidden. Because as recently as the 1800s, a tomb was opened near Rome, and a small bronze cup was found inside, still warm to the touch. The flame was gone, but the air smelled faintly of sulfur. The object was confiscated. No one knows where it went. We live in an age where we believe all the ancient mysteries have been solved, but a story like this, a flame that wouldn't go out, reminds us how much we still don't understand. Who were the people who made these eternal flames? What materials did they use? Where did that knowledge go? And most of all, how many more of these sealed lamps still lie beneath the ground, quietly burning, alone in the dark? The ring that doesn't rust. It stands quietly in the heart of Delhi, a pillar forged more than 1600 years ago, and at its base, a simple iron ring. Ordinary at first glance, weathered, modest, but not once in all those centuries has it rusted. Not through dust storms, not through monsoons, not even through acid rains. In a world where metal corrodes with time, this iron simply doesn't. And for decades, metallurgists, historians, and engineers have asked, why? The pillar itself is a marvel, rising just over 7 meters, weighing more than 6 tons, carved with Sanskrit inscriptions that speak of a king long forgotten by time. But it's the metal, not the message, that captures most eyes. Let's go back, not just centuries, but through the haze of ancient chemistry. Because what makes this ring and its parent pillar so unusual is not just how long they've lasted, but how perfectly they were made, in an age without electricity, without modern smelting furnaces, without protective coatings. Yet somehow, this iron has resisted time better than most steel we make today. When British engineers first studied it in the 19th century, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Many assumed it had been preserved by some hidden layer, maybe a coating of wax or oil. But no, the surface was bare, just raw, weather-beaten iron. Except, it wasn't raw. Not really, it was layered. Modern science would eventually reveal the presence of a thin, crystalline film on its surface, not applied by hand, but formed naturally over time. A compound known as misawite, an oxide of iron, hydrogen, and phosphorus. But where did it come from? Turns out, the iron wasn't just pure. It was crafted with care, using a technique now long forgotten. The ancient Indian blacksmiths didn't just melt and pour the metal. They layered it, hammered it, allowed traces of phosphorus to remain, which modern steelmakers normally remove entirely. That phosphorus changed everything. Combined with Delhi's relatively dry air and the ring's slow exposure to moisture, the misawite film formed and protected the ring beneath. So instead of rusting, it sealed itself. But that leads to an even more curious question. Did they know? Did those blacksmiths, working in iron-rich furnaces over 1,600 years ago, intend this resistance? Did they know their work would outlast empires, outlast kings, temples, even languages? Or was it just the perfect accident, a miracle of material, method, and moment? Historians still debate this, because forging iron in those days wasn't simple. It required charcoal furnaces, precise heat control, endless hammering, and knowledge passed mouth to mouth, hand to hand. In fact, forging that much iron, 6 tons, without impurities, was a feat in itself, let alone creating a piece so smooth, so uniform, and so durable. When you look at the ring now, it's easy to miss all this. It looks small, simple, but imagine what it survived. The Mughal invasions, British colonial rule, pollution from modern Delhi traffic, tourists brushing fingers against its cool metal, rains, sun, floods, earthquakes, yet it stands, untouched, unbent, unbroken. In local legends it's said the pillar was a gift from the gods. Some even believe it marks the spot where the earth rests, a symbolic nail driven into the back of the cosmic serpent. And if the pillar ever falls, so will the world. Of course, these are stories, but even scientists admit there's still something unusual here. Despite all analysis, we've never been able to fully recreate the exact combination of materials and environmental conditions that make this iron invincible. We can make better steel, faster alloys, but nothing with this strange self-protective harmony, something that repairs itself, layer by layer, even as centuries go by. And maybe that's the most fascinating part. It's not flashy, it's not gilded in gold, it doesn't hum or glow, but it lasts, quietly. Think about this. How many things made today will last 1,600 years? Even monuments made of concrete or bronze fall apart, get replaced, get forgotten. But this ring, and its pillar, are still here, still waiting, still whispering. So the next time someone tells you something must be high-tech to be advanced, remember the ring that doesn't rust. A 1,600-year-old message, not in ink or voice, but in silence and survival. The statue that watches you back. In the vast emptiness of the South Pacific, over 2,000 miles from the nearest major landmass, lies a remote island called Rapa Nui, though most of the world knows it as Easter Island. It's one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth. But despite its small size and extreme remoteness, it houses one of the most famous archaeological mysteries in the world, a mystery that continues to leave even seasoned researchers quietly unsettled. Dotting the landscape like silent sentinels are nearly 1,000 giant statues, known as moai. These figures, tall, solemn, and carved from volcanic rock, weigh up to 80 tons and stand as tall as a 4-story building. They have oversized heads, long ears, and featureless bodies that fade into the stone. And perhaps most haunting of all, they appear to be watching. You can't shake the feeling. When you walk among them, whether under the blazing tropical sun or beneath a star-choked sky, it feels as though something ancient is aware of your presence. Not just the sense of history, but a sense of attention. You begin to wonder, are you studying the statues, or are they studying you? And then you learn about the eyes. Most people don't realize this, But originally, some of the moai weren't blind, they had eyes. Not carved eyes, but something else. Socketed eyes, inlaid with coral and black obsidian pupils, added after the rest of the statue was erected. When these eyes were in place, the moai transformed from passive monuments to something more unnerving. They didn't just stand, they looked, they stared, and legend says, they saw. According to Rapa Nui oral traditions, the moai were more than art. They weren't decorations, they were vessels, anchors, created to hold the spiritual power of ancestors, a force called mana. The larger the statue, the more mana it could contain. The stronger the chief or elder, the more mana they could project into the world, through the moai's gaze. Some were said to watch over specific clans, others faced the village, their back to the sea, guarding their people, keeping balance, ensuring survival. But over time, something changed. One by one the statues were toppled, their eyes removed, their faces buried, their mana forgotten. And yet, when archaeologists began to restore the statues in the 20th century, re-erecting a handful and even recreating the original eye inlays, locals started to report something strange. The statues felt different, almost alert, more intense, like they had reawakened. Of course, to modern science, these reports are anecdotal, superstition, coincidence, but the unease is real. Even today, some islanders refuse to pass certain moai after sunset, not because of any specific threat, but because the feeling is too much, like walking past an old soldier still on duty, silent, still, but not unaware. How were these statues even built? Most of the moai were carved from volcanic tuff, a soft rock found in the Rano Raraku quarry. They were sculpted using stone tools and incredible patience. But it's what came after the carving that raises questions. The people of Rapa Nui had no wheels, no beasts of burden, no metal tools, and yet they moved these colossal statues miles across uneven terrain, even uphill in some cases. How? Some researchers suggest they were rolled on logs. Others believe they were walked upright, using ropes and human coordination, a technique that was successfully recreated in modern times. But that only deepens the mystery. How did a relatively small population, with limited resources, achieve this on such a massive scale? Why dedicate so much effort? Why build hundreds? Why make them look like this? There's something about their proportions that doesn't sit right. The elongated heads, the deep-set eyes, the strange solemnity of their expressions. No one knows exactly who they were modeled after, or why the designs were so consistent. Were they based on ancestors, or something older, more symbolic? Some fringe theories even suggest the moai were inspired by non-human beings, entities remembered in myth, not history. Of course, mainstream archaeologists don't entertain these ideas, but they also admit there's much we still don't understand. In 2012, a surprising discovery was made. For decades, people assumed the moai were just heads and torsos, but excavation revealed that many actually have full bodies buried beneath the soil, complete with arms, carved tattoos, and inscriptions. They weren't just watching, they were standing, waiting. Even stranger, some of the buried statues were covered intentionally, as if someone wanted to hide them, or protect them, or silence them. And what about the eyes? The eyes were made of white coral and a dark stone center, often obsidian. They weren't attached during the carving, only after the moai were erected. It was a final step, a moment of activation, a turning point, when the statue stopped being a shape and became a watcher. The few surviving eyes are now kept in museums behind glass. But even there, the atmosphere around them is eerie. Staff at one museum in Santiago have mentioned odd experiences: flickering lights near the display, shadows where there shouldn't be, sudden changes in temperature, and always, the feeling of being watched. Of course, these are just stories, anecdotes. But on Rapa Nui, stories are powerful. Memory is power, and mana never fully leaves. There's one last thing that's rarely mentioned. In one of the island's oldest legends, there's a tale of the last moai, a statue so ancient, its name was forgotten. It was said to watch not the island, but the sky. Unlike the others, it wasn't made to honor ancestors, but to guard against something above, something that came once and might return. This statue was buried, hidden somewhere on the island, and never spoken of again. Just a story. But there's a reason researchers keep searching, and when they find that forgotten one, if they ever do, the question will no longer be who it sees, but what? The skull with a metal plate. Imagine standing inside a quiet museum in Lima. You're staring into a glass case at a human skull, but something about it doesn't sit right. The bone is old, centuries, maybe even over 1,000 years, but what makes you pause is the glint of metal. A smooth, clean rectangle, almost surgically embedded into the top of the skull. No jagged cracks, no signs of trauma, no stitches, just a single sheet of metal, pressed into place like someone performed surgery long before we had the tools for it. This isn't science fiction. This is an actual artifact pulled from the earth in ancient Peru, and archaeologists still aren't quite sure what to make of it. See, in modern medicine, the idea of inserting a metal plate into the skull is a common practice for severe head injuries, trauma, fractures, even brain surgery. But here's the thing. This skull, and others like it, date back to a time when there should have been no concept of surgical tools, antiseptics, or healing through bone grafts. Yet the edges of the bone around the metal are smooth, showing signs of regrowth, which means the person survived and healed. The ancient Peruvian civilization wasn't exactly unknown for its medical prowess. They practiced a form of cranial surgery known as trepanation, where holes were carefully drilled into the skull to relieve pressure or treat head injuries. Sounds barbaric, right? Except, it worked. Some skulls show signs of not just survival, but recovery. These weren't random cuts. These were deliberate procedures, performed again and again. But where it gets strange is this: the use of metal plates. Researchers have identified skulls with embedded metals that don't appear to be ornamental. These weren't headpieces or masks. They were functional implants, perhaps copper, silver, or a mix. Some theories say it was symbolic. Others argue it was medicinal. But the placement, precision, and post-surgery bone regrowth suggest something more advanced. Even X-ray scans show that the implants stayed in place and didn't cause fatal infections. That's almost impossible by today's surgical standards, especially when you consider these procedures were likely done without anesthesia, without microscopes, without sterilization. How did they know what they were doing? One idea is that these skull surgeries weren't done in isolation. They were the result of generations of trial and error. In some areas of Peru, entire cemeteries have been uncovered with hundreds of skulls, some bearing failed trepanations, others with nearly perfect ones. It's possible these early surgeons understood more than we think, that they observed the body, studied which techniques caused less bleeding, learned how to avoid critical brain areas, and somehow, despite all odds, they developed a method of trauma surgery that let people survive and even thrive after. But then comes the oddest part: who was chosen to receive a metal plate? These weren't everyday people. Most of the skulls with metal implants appear to belong to individuals of higher status, leaders, warriors, maybe even shamans. Were these early versions of prosthetics meant to preserve their lives? Or was there a deeper purpose? Some researchers have proposed a spiritual angle, that the metal wasn't just physical support, but something symbolic, a connection to the heavens, an energy conductor, a mark of rebirth after death. After all, in many Andean traditions, the head was sacred, the vessel of the soul. In some ways, these skulls are medical marvels. In others, they're complete mysteries. No written texts explain how the procedures were done, no blueprints, just the remains, silent but undeniably advanced. And then there's the whisper among fringe theorists that this metal didn't come from Earth, that the plate wasn't just copper, it was something harder to explain, a material not matching anything local. These are, of course, unproven, but the fact that such theories even exist shows just how far this mystery reaches. Today, if you were to walk through certain museums in South America, you'd see them on display, skulls lined in glass, their metal plates still shining dully after centuries underground. Somewhere, in a forgotten Andean mountain village, a healer once held a blade and a piece of metal and saved a life that should have been lost. And somehow, we're still trying to figure out how they did it. The device that predicted the stars. It was pulled from the depths of the Aegean Sea, covered in rust and coral, looking like just another relic from a long-forgotten shipwreck. At first glance, there was nothing particularly special about the strange lump of bronze and gears. But as conservators began cleaning it, brushing away centuries of salt and silence, something began to emerge. A complexity that didn't belong to the era it was found in. It was mechanical, precise, and ancient. This device, known today as the Antikythera mechanism, is unlike anything else from its time. Buried for over 2,000 years, it had no right to exist, not with the level of engineering it held, because this was more than a simple gear or dial. This was a computer, a machine capable of tracking the movements of the stars, the sun, the moon, even predicting eclipses. It's older than most surviving technology, and yet it seems to function like something that should have come centuries later, possibly thousands. How could such an advanced machine have been made during a time when the world supposedly lacked the tools to create it? The Antikythera mechanism was discovered in 1901 by sponge divers near the Greek island of Antikythera. What they thought was a shipwreck filled with statues and bronze turned out to be something far more mysterious. Among the wreckage, they found this encrusted bronze fragment, something the divers at first mistook for a simple gear or decorative piece. But the longer they studied it, the stranger it became. It wasn't a single gear, it was a system of gears, dozens of interlocking parts, each one carefully cut, forming a mechanism with incredible accuracy. Like a puzzle from the past, the device seemed to be telling a story. If only someone could read it. For decades, the device sat in museums, barely understood. It wasn't until modern imaging techniques were used, like X-ray tomography and 3D scanning, that researchers began to truly understand what they were looking at. Inside the corroded metal, they found gears layered with astonishing precision. Some had tiny hand-cut teeth, others connected to rotating dials. It began to resemble something familiar, the inner workings of a clock. But this wasn't telling time, it was predicting the sky. The more they studied the gears, the more they discovered the mechanism was astronomically accurate. It tracked the phases of the moon. It predicted solar and lunar eclipses with exact dates. It mapped the positions of planets, including retrograde motion, when a planet appears to move backward in the sky. The ancient Greeks didn't just build a model of the sky, they engineered one that could move. And even stranger, the mechanism wasn't symbolic or decorative. It worked. How could they have done this? At the time of its creation, around 150 BCE, Europe was still developing basic iron tools. Clockwork mechanisms like this didn't appear again until the 14th century, and yet this device, made of bronze and thought to be built by unknown Greek artisans, shows a level of miniaturization and mathematical understanding that rivals Renaissance-era devices. Could there have been an unknown lineage of scientific knowledge now lost? Was this the only such machine ever built, or simply the only one that survived? Inscribed on the casing are faint Greek texts, instructions, dates, and references to astronomical events, but deciphering them hasn't been easy. Time, corrosion, and sea salt have erased much. What little remains reveals a world obsessed with the stars, a world that didn't just gaze upward but tried to predict it. Imagine for a moment being an ancient Greek philosopher, turning the gears of this machine in your hands, watching dials spin as you calculate the next lunar eclipse, holding in your fingers the future of the heavens. The front dial of the device appears to show the zodiac, a calendar of the stars. Behind that, more dials display the Metonic cycle, a 19-year lunar calendar used to synchronize moon phases with the solar year. One dial even shows the Saros cycle, a nearly 18-year period used to predict eclipses with incredible precision. These were not crude approximations, they were correct. How did ancient craftsmen create such accurate calculations? They had no telescopes, no modern mathematics, no metal lathes or precision cutting tools. And yet the teeth of these gears mesh almost flawlessly. Researchers have attempted to recreate the device using only the tools and techniques available in ancient Greece. Most fail. Some succeed, but only with modern enhancements. Could this device have been based on knowledge passed down from an even earlier source? Could there have been a lineage of engineers and astronomers whose work vanished from history, only to be rediscovered in this single artifact? Other questions remain. What ship was this device traveling on? Where was it going? Why were so many statues and valuable objects on board? Was it the possession of a philosopher, a wealthy noble, or a temple? And most mysteriously, why haven't we found others? If this device existed, surely it wasn't the only one. But to date, not a single other example has been discovered. No workshop, no blueprint, no reference to its design in Greek literature. Only vague poetic references to mechanical orreries, planet models, exist. It's like stumbling across a single laptop in a village with no electricity. You'd be forced to wonder, who built this? And why here? Some fringe theories suggest the device was a remnant of a lost civilization, a memory of Atlantis, a gift from visitors. But most scholars agree it was built by human hands. Still, that only deepens the mystery, because if they could build this, what else did they know that we've forgotten? In recent years, researchers using AI have attempted to decode more of the text on the mechanism. One phrase seems to describe the gears meeting the sun, possibly referring to planetary conjunctions. Another references the color of eclipses, suggesting an understanding not just of when they'd occur, but what they would look like. What kind of mind built such a device? Some believe it may have been the work of Hipparchus, one of the greatest Greek astronomers. Others suggest Archimedes, but there's no proof. Even with modern scans, researchers are still unsure of how many gears are hidden within the fragments. Some estimate as many as 37 moving parts. Others say more. This isn't just an archaeological object, it's a challenge, a mystery from history saying, we knew more than you think. If not for a single shipwreck, the Antikythera mechanism might have vanished forever. No records, no stories, nothing, just lost knowledge, drowned beneath the waves. But it didn't vanish, it surfaced, just long enough to remind us how much we don't know, and how much there is still to uncover. Because sometimes, the stars don't just light up the night sky. Sometimes, they leave behind a machine that whispers their secrets through turning gears. The bronze dodecahedron of the lost Roman realm. Let the sound of swaying tree branches and distant birds fade into a hush, as we settle into the story. They weren't expecting something cosmic. But as archaeologists gently brushed away centuries of soil north of the Roman Empire's old boundaries, in what is now France, a small bronze object emerged. 12 faces, hollow, pentagonal panels, each pierced with circular holes of varying size, small knobs at the 20 vertices, between golf ball and grapefruit size. Nothing like it in Rome. It turned out to be one of over 120 Roman dodecahedra, bronze 12-sided puzzles dug up across Europe, but nearly none in Italy itself. They date from the 2nd to 4th centuries AD, found largely in the former northwestern provinces, Belgium, Germany, France, Britain and nearby regions. Live Science +1, New York Post 1. At first glance, they might be dismissed as toys, candlestick holders, or measuring tools. One might even be placed beside a bone rod in a woman's grave, suggesting ritual or symbolic use. Live Science +1, New York Post 1. Yet with no mention in Roman texts, no designs, no inscriptions, their purpose remains stubbornly unknown. So what are they? Maybe they were practical. A measuring gauge for cloth or threads, some say. The varying holes might fit different sized tools, a dice set, perhaps, or a candlestick with holes for wicks. But none of that feels right. The craftsmanship is too precise, too consistent. They're hollow, thin-walled, usually flawless. Maybe they were philosophical. Classical researcher Michael Guggenberger proposed the dodecahedron could embody Platonic or Pythagorean cosmology, where the 12-faced shape symbolizes the universe itself. Live Science +1, New York Post 1. In that sense, maybe they were amulets, ritual symbols, emblems of divine order carried by merchants, soldiers, or spiritual leaders. Here's another hint. Despite widespread distribution, they're never found in Italy, the heart of Rome. Many appear in Celtic-influenced zones, close to trade routes or frontier boundaries. What if they were imported from Celtic cultures, or made for local elites who fused Roman and local belief systems? Something Celtic-European landmarks beyond Rome. Let's imagine holding one. You cradle the cold bronze, you turn it, and each face reveals a different ring of holes. Hole diameters from a few millimeters to over a centimeter. Each vertex adorned with a tiny knob, carefully rounded, balanced. It feels complete, intentional. My mind drifts to metaphors, a miniature cosmic model, unfinished constellations, an object meant to channel universal harmony. Despite centuries of speculation, none of the dozen-plus theories fit perfectly. Recent laboratory analyses have confirmed they date to the later Roman Empire. That's real. The metal, alloy mix, and internal structure all match known Roman casting techniques. thetravel.com +3 live science +3 splashtravels.com +5 pararational.com +5 thetravel.com +5 pararational.com +5 thetravel.com +5 pararational. Others still propose they were cosmic maps, given to initiates of secret orders who revered Platonic solids. One find even accompanied another odd item, a blunt bone rod, suggesting a ritual staff, ceremonial instrument, or measurement tool lost to time. New York Post. Whatever the truth, it's not simple. If the shape once held symbolic power, if it represented the universe in micro, why leave no explanation? Why scatter them across provinces? Why never replicate them in bronze, or record them in Latin? And what compelled elite Romans, or Romanized local leaders, to carry such objects? We may never reconstruct their ancient intent, but holding one today is like holding a question from the past. A question not answered with words, but carried in bronze geometry. Sometimes artifacts don't reveal themselves with explanation. They challenge us with silence, and in that silence, we stand face to face with mystery.